I'm looking at U.S. government documents, some from the FBI, some from the CIA, but you could see that after the Second World War, the U.S. government, as well as other governments, were still looking for Adolf Hitler. Wanted to know if I would be interested in being a co-host for Hunting Hitler. And I think they wanted me because I was a real war crimes investigator. The International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, that's where I worked. And then I got promoted to lead the investigation against Slobodan Milosevic. Did he really commit suicide? Did he really die in the Fuhrer bunker? Stalin told Truman that he didn't know what happened to Hitler. Hitler was missing. They didn't have him. Unbeknownst to a lot of people, the United States government and our archives here held x-rays of Hitler's head. But I'm here to tell you 100%, Hitler died in
I'm looking forward to it. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and we'll get going.
All right. Well, I'm John Cencich, and what I currently do is I'm a professor of criminology. I'm at Pennsylvania Western University. I'm a tenured full professor there. And I'm in my next semester is my last semester. I'm in what they call phased retirement. So I'll be out. But in the meantime, I've been looking at a few other things, and I teach part-time at the law school, University of Pittsburgh, and I do also at James Madison University because I've moved to my vacation home in the mountains in the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia. So I teach a class for them. I love it. I love the political science. I teach political science courses like political assassinations, military commissions such as Guantanamo Bay, which I told you when we spoke on the phone. I've been down there, so maybe that can be weaved into this conversation somehow. And that's what I currently do. And the courses I teach organized crime, international criminal justice. Of course, I teach law courses. I teach behavioral analysis of violent crime, getting into the criminal mind. These are the types of things. So how did I get there? I mean, that's just didn't walk in and say, can I have that job? And I think one of the important things where I work is that all of the professors, besides having our doctorates, and that's good for some universities. They go out and they get their PhDs, and then they teach these subjects and they teach the theory, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. They're preparing people to become professors elsewhere, to be really good researchers. At our university, all of our professors had practical experiences before becoming academics. And we take pride in the fact that we're a bridge, we blend practical experience with theory. And the students seem to enjoy that. So when I get in front of a class, and I see this in my student reviews, I'm not going to tout myself, but just to kind of introduce myself, they really do appreciate the real life stories. So if I'm talking about war crimes and I discuss where I was, or I arrested this person, or I interrogated this person, that's a lot different than teaching it out of a book. Or working undercover. I worked undercover, buying drugs, prostitution. So I'm teaching the law on entrapment. Well, we can talk about the predisposition of the offender, for example, but what's it like to be the actual undercover officer, agent that's doing that? And I can do that, and I can tell how things went good, how things went bad, how I barely got away with my life. And so introducing myself as this professor, I did have these experiences. And I started out as a police officer in Michigan, and just regular patrol officer. And I eventually moved to Virginia. And while I was going to college at Virginia Commonwealth University, and did different things. I worked at the university on the university police force. It's one of the largest in the country, 92 officers, which may not sound like a lot, but it's an urban environment, and I worked there. And then I went and I worked for the state of Virginia, and I was a special agent, and a lot of with the Department of Alcoholic Beverage Control, the Enforcement Bureau. So yeah, a lot of states don't have this. I know Florida does have an agency that's like that. and I think it's the Department of Alcohol and Tax Enforcement or something like that here in Florida. I specialized in gambling operations, but I did bootlegging, stills. I also did what we call shot houses or nip joints in the city of Richmond. There was like over 200 of them there. These are unlicensed places that sell alcohol. So is it just the tax dollars that the state's not getting? Well, not quite, because these are where the shootings occur. These are where the stabbings occur. And so we focused on those and either going in undercover or sending in what we call special undercover officers to go in and buy that and buy drugs.
Buy
and
drinks and alcohol and drugs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I did a lot of undercover work. So that's basically my professional background, which led to me applying for a job in 1998. Or it might have been a little bit before that. No, it was 1998 for the United Nations. That the U.S. government, State Department, had sent out an email. I read the email that said that the United Nations was looking for investigators to do war crimes, and they would move to The Hague and go. And really, they went all over the world to conduct these investigations. And I applied, and I got there, and I did. I was successful, and I arrived there. I brought my family with me. We lived in The Hague. It was a wonderful experience for my family.
Where's The Hague?
The Hague is in the Netherlands. It's a city, Den Haag in Dutch, but it's a beautiful city. It's a diplomatic city, and so I lived there. The U.S. Embassy was there. The International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, that's where I worked. There's also the International Court of Justice. Just a wonderful place, wonderful people, and an incredible job that really mixes intelligence, counterintelligence, criminal investigations, and investigating the world's worst crimes. I'm talking about hostage taking, torture. So I know what torture is, and I know what the law is surrounding torture, murder, sexual assault, extermination. It doesn't get any worse than that. These crimes are actually, most of them are considered crimes against all of humanity. So I was fortunate, and I had 2 years doing certain work, and then I got promoted to lead the investigation against Slobodan Milosevic, who had been the president of Serbia and the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. And that case was, well, it was really 3 cases. There was one for the crimes that were committed in Bosnia. There was one that was for the crimes that were committed in Kosovo, and one for crimes that were committed in Croatia. So I was appointed to lead the crimes that were committed in Croatia.
So this was international news at the time during this investigation while you were investigating it, right? I mean, this was big. This was.
Oh yeah, no, it was all over.
Yeah. I remember seeing this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And Slobodan Milosevic was on TV as this perpetrator as much as Vladimir Putin is on TV now.
And he was the president of.
Well, he was the. I mean, he was an interesting person because he actually had the. We good? Oh.
Yeah. Ron's just pulling up.
See.
So, Yugoslavia.
Yeah. There's Slobo right there. He actually went and had his boss, who was the president, assassinated, and he was elevated to that. And then in Kosovo, the Serbs were alleging that they were being discriminated against in Kosovo by the ethnic Albanians that lived there. So you had the Serbs and the ethnic Albanians living in this so-called autonomous province in Serbia. And he went there and he quelled that. And he said, no one will ever hurt you again. And the crowd just exploded in favor of him, or erupted in applause. And you could see his face, the power that went there. And after that, because this is all after Josip Broz Tito, who was the chairman of the SFRY, the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, and which, you know, the United States had fairly good relations with them, even though it was a communist country. with several republics, Macedonia, Croatia, Bosnia. What else do we have there? Montenegro, Serbia.
Let me just level set again, just based to kind of summarize where we are, just for the audience, maybe. So you kind of, well, you're currently teaching about this stuff. So you're educating people, students, about a lot of your work. You're bringing real world examples from your past to your students, which is fantastic. You kind of started off your career just like anybody else, police, kind of rising up at the local and state level, and applied for this job at the UN to investigate war crimes. You got to the UN, you got promoted, you handling more responsibility. You are now in charge of this investigation for for somebody who committed horrible acts of atrocities that the world didn't know even existed, didn't even know that was happening. And so it's your job to kind of dive into those crimes and decide, what do we do about this? So what did you start to find as you started to investigate this guy and what he was doing?
Yeah. So the thing is, the crimes on the ground, what we called the crime base, pretty much most of that had been completed. So we could go into different areas of Croatia, for example, in Dubrovnik or Vukovar, which was almost completely destroyed, and many areas in Croatia where towns or villages or hamlets or even sub-hamlets were just razed and people were killed, ethnic cleansing. We pretty much, by the time I got promoted to lead that investigation, most of that work had been done. Okay. And that's good police work. That's good investigative work. But what we had to do at that point that hadn't been done was, how do we tie that to the top? How do we connect it? Because when these crimes were being committed by federal forces, for example, Slobodan Milosevic didn't have what we would call de jure, by law, didn't have control over federal forces, only Serbian forces. All right? Or if there were paramilitaries in there, how do we prove that he had control over them? So we had to work our way up to the top. Now, when I was doing gambling investigations, I did conspiracy investigations, which involves working our way to the top and also coming up with a theory of prosecution. So for crimes against humanity and war crimes, there is no crime called conspiracy to commit war crimes or conspiracy to commit crimes against humanity. There is for genocide, but that's something entirely different. So how do we prove it? And before that, everybody was trying to look at the chain of command, but he didn't have any official chain of command. And it was difficult. So a colleague of mine on another team, he was the legal advisor for the team that was investigating, his name was Dermot Groom. The lead investigator, the person who was in charge of that case, was Bernie O'Donnell from Australia. Dermot Groom was from the United States. He'd been a prosecutor. And the three of us got together and we looked at something that was called the common purpose doctrine, or the joint criminal enterprise, where people come together. So for example, it doesn't have to be a conspiracy. If we were here in the United States and there was going to be a bank robbery, and one person goes in with a gun, and then you have your lookout man, you have your getaway driver, maybe somebody else, and they're all there at the scene, for example, they're all considered principals to the crime. So you don't, even though you could charge them with conspiracy because they didn't get there without agreeing to it, but if that conspiracy law isn't available under international law, there was court cases, and this was actually used although conspiracy was used in Nuremberg, so was the common purpose and the joint criminal enterprise. It wasn't called the joint criminal enterprise, but the common purpose was. And so we we put together a position on this is how we should be pursuing this particular case. And we sent it to the chief prosecutor, Carla Del Ponte, and she agreed. And so for all these years, all trying to show chain of command, you can't do it. And you can't do it in any other way. And here we were so many years after nothing had been done. So by doing this, and she gave us the green light, so that was the prosecution theory. Taking that prosecution theory for Croatia, working with the team, we developed an investigations plan and put everything in a chart and who was going to do what, but we looked at holes. This isn't just everybody going off on a jolly somewhere and doing what they wanted to do. We needed to go out and get specific evidence, but we needed to know that beforehand and what we were going to do. And that's what we did. And on the team, I assigned everybody a particular person that was involved in this joint criminal enterprise that we believed that was involved. And the prosecutor had signed off on this. You know, we don't just go out and target somebody. They'd say this person is a subject, this person's a subject, this person's a subject, and said, okay, well, let's take a look at this. We used inside sources. We did financial analysis. We executed search warrants. We interviewed people. We did a lot of really interesting things that I did here in the United States coming from a common law country. A lot of the people come from civil law countries, and the criminal investigation process is driven by the prosecutor. You'll see that if there's a shooting in Germany or something, that the prosecutor comes on and is directing the criminal investigation as opposed to a senior investigating officer in London or somebody in New York. You have a different system. So I used the skills that I had and brought them there. And not just me. I don't want to take claim or fame for that, but we all resort to our own skills. It worked. And we flipped inside people. And I can just give you one example, Matt. When we drafted the indictment, and I wrote the first draft of the indictment, we listed all of the co-perpetrators. Here we would call them co-conspirators, but we called them co-perpetrators because we didn't have that conspiracy law. Well, in the United States, at least in the federal government, apparently there's a Department of Justice policy that says you don't name somebody in an indictment unless you're going to indict them. Because otherwise, how do they defend themselves of their good name? I get it. And if that happened to me, I would be offended. It'd be hard to do that. But the people that were listed there as co-perpetrators didn't have a good name. This had already been well settled that they had been involved in these, and we felt in these crimes, and I felt that the name should be there because we could use that to get some of those people that were listed there to be cooperating witnesses and say, look, you're listed in this indictment. You cooperate. Here's the rule of the International Criminal Tribunal that says if you cooperate, it can be taken into consideration by the court because you're likely going to be indicted. And some people objected to that. And
how long did this whole process take?
I was there for 4 years.
Yeah.
And when I was promoted to the position to lead the investigation against Slobodan Milosevic, I was sitting in the prosecutor's office, chief prosecutor's office, and she said, and there was a number of people in there, and she said, well, look at Croatia. How come there's no indictment on a Milosevic for what happened in Croatia?
Let's pull up the map, Ryan, real quick. Can you just like geographically maybe just walk us through real quick, like where is he based out of and kind of what's happening? Where is he sending people? Where are these atrocities kind of happening?
Okay, so if you look at the map right in the middle, that's Serbia was right there. It had a red dot on it. That was, and yeah, there's Serbia. And if you go north of Serbia, the word Serbia, you'll see Belgrade. That's the capital of Serbia. And that's where Milosevic was. What they wanted, what we alleged, was that the objective of the joint criminal enterprise was to create a greater Serbia. And we've got that. We got that from informants. We got that from interrogating people. We got that from documents. So we're alleging that they wanted a greater Serbia and Milosevic, and he had fired, this had been a federal military, and he had fired people that were Croatian generals and had fired Bosnian generals. So everybody that's left is a Serbian general. So he's really controlling these folks. And so he wants to carve out a part of Bosnia. He wants to carve out a part of Croatia, north of that, and make this greater Serbia, and to do it through unlawful means.
So he wants land.
He wants the land.
Yeah.
People say it's the religion because the Serbs are Orthodox mostly. The Croats are mostly Roman Catholics. And the Bosnians, well, I mean, there's Serbs and Catholic. I mean, there's Catholics and Orthodox there, but the areas that he was really going after were areas that were Muslim. So people would say, well, this is a war of religion. I don't believe that it was a war of religion at all.
So he's just going in and killing and murdering Islam, like Muslims?
Muslims, Catholics. So he goes in, he wants to grab the land and make this greater Serbia. He does this through ethnic cleansing. And we allege, okay, if you're going to go in there and you're going to ethnically cleanse a town, if you're going to do that, you're going to forcibly deport or expel people from where they live. It is a foreseeable consequence that you will kill people. Because, otherwise we'd have to say that he ordered the murder.
Right.
But if we know that he ordered the ethnic cleansing, then the homicides are a foreseeable consequence of that.
And what year was he doing this?
Well, 1991, 92, 93.
Okay. And so he's just sending in troops into these towns, and he's saying, you have to leave, and they're probably killing people. They are killing people. What percentage of people are like leaving these towns versus getting murdered, just being a part of this genocide?
Well, when they go into a particular village, some people flee, some people stay there and won't leave. I remember one town in Croatia, one little village where a man was in his wheelchair and couldn't leave, and his wife decided to stay behind. And then when the family members came back after everybody had gone, when the smoke was probably still there, there they were with bullets in their body.
Wow.
Children were shot, people were raped, sexually assaulted. It was horrendous, and so we had to get to the top.
Any idea how many total casualties from this crusade?
Well, I wish I could tell you, because a lot of people in the former Yugoslavia died as a result of combat. But in terms of the murders in Croatia, where I was, for example, in the town of Vukovar, or the city of Vukovar, there was a hospital called the Vukovar Hospital. And there were mostly Croatian patients in there. War patients. They were not soldiers, but they'd been shot and they're in the hospital. But there were some Serbs in there too, but the Croats were taking care of them as well. That's what you do. When you're a medical doctor, you don't care which country they're from. You don't even care if they're the enemy. You treat them. And then if they're going to either be repatriated or they're going to be held as a prisoner of war, but they're there to treat them. That's all that these medical people do. And rightfully so, in my view. That's how Americans do things too. We repatriate people.
Okay. Ryan, maybe you can pull up an estimate for that on chat or something. But here we go. 22,000 killed or missing people. So our government didn't decide to send in military support for this, or?
Well, now I will tell you that we did in Bosnia first. That's what stopped the war in Bosnia. And then it results in what's called the Dayton Agreement at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which I want to bring up Wright-Pat later, because there's another case that I investigated after this.
Okay.
That originates in some ways at Wright-Pat. Mm-hmm. So Milosevic came there, and the president, Tudjman from Croatia, was there. From Bosnia, that president was there, and they all had this little truce, and supposedly, and that ends the war. So, but we did go in. We sent forces into Bosnia.
That's right. Yeah, I remember that now.
And particularly by air. And then
I try to forget as much of this history as possible, but it's
true. We had one of our planes shot down over Serbia, and there was a movie with Gene Hackman that's based on that. I don't recall the name of it. So, but now if we look at Croatia for a moment, which is what I was in charge of.
Can zoom in.
There's two major things going on in Croatia.
Where were you based out of?
I was based out of The Hague, in the Netherlands, but I would go into all over Croatia.
Oh, okay. You just traveled Croatia.
I've been into all of these areas. And so in Croatia, the Serbs had gone into the center of Croatia. It's an area, you won't see it on the map, it's an area that's called the Krajina, or the military frontier. And there was a lot of Serbs that were in there. And so Serbia, ethnic Serbs that lived in Croatia, so they were Croatian Serbs. But remember, the Serbs envisioned this greater Serbia, so they wanted to come into the Krajina, into this area in Croatia, and declare this land to be part of Serbia. And they expelled Croats from the Krajina and say, this is Serbia. And they killed people, and they destroyed Croatian homes, and they did, committed those atrocities while they were doing that. Croatia goes into eventually, I don't remember Operation Storm and Operation Lightning, I think, but I may be wrong on those because this is a time ago, but the Croatian forces go in to reclaim that territory. In doing so, it was alleged that they committed war crimes. And the U.S. government, now I don't know how much they admit, how much they deny, but the U.S. government or military was helping. Now, I don't know that they were on the ground helping, but they were certainly giving advice to the Croats on how to go in and reclaim your land. So we were involved with that. And I'm not saying that there was anything wrong with what they did, because one of the generals, the Croatian generals, was indicted for war crimes for what happened as they went back in to this area to reclaim this Croatian territory. And he was found not guilty. And perhaps rightfully so. And just because you're charged with something doesn't mean you're guilty. And not everybody that gets killed, because, here's the thing. When civilians get killed under international law, the killing of a civilian is not necessarily a crime. Even the knowing killing of a civilian is not necessarily against the law. So if I'm a combatant and I'm going after a legitimate military target, and even though I know that there are civilians in the vicinity, I can make that strike and knowingly, intentionally, tragically kill those civilians. I wouldn't want to be the person that does that. I'm just using myself hypothetically. I certainly wouldn't want to be the person that does that. As long as the number of civilian deaths is not disproportionate to the military value. How do you weigh that? And it can be difficult. And I would say most prosecutors try to stay away from that. If there's any type of military objective that was close to where the civilians were, they don't charge those civilian deaths because it's called collateral damage, and it's not unlawful. I wasn't involved in that case that I was just telling you about, where the Serbs came in and expelled the Croats and the Croats came back and expelled the Serbs. I wasn't involved in that at all. What I was involved with was the Serbs coming in to Croatia and committing crimes against the Croats. So it was I was investigating Serbs who had committed crimes in Croatia rather than Croats who had committed crimes in Croatia against the Serbs. Boy, does it get convoluted.
Right.
But That's how we did it, even in Bosnia.
Just separate. You were
Separate teams.
Separate team.
So you could be in. I was in an area in Bosnia called Mostar, and investigating crimes where Croatians, Bosnian Croats committed crimes against Bosnian Muslims, but another team was looking at crimes committed by Bosnian Muslims against Bosnian Croats.
Sure.
And that's just the way we did it.
War's messy.
It's very, very messy.
Yep. So the final kind of conclusion of this investigation, how did it end?
Okay, so that brings us to an indictment against Slobodan Milosevic as the leader of a joint criminal enterprise and the purpose of the joint criminal enterprise was to use criminal means to create this so-called Greater Serbia. Not just to declare this is our land, but to use criminal means to do it. And by using those criminal means, that other crimes were foreseeable. So the ethnic cleansing was a crime to begin with. And forced deportations is a crime to begin with. The destruction of civilian homes is a crime to begin with. So we can see that. He's controlling this. He's controlling the paramilitary because we get informants from inside. He's controlling paramilitaries. He's controlling organized crime. He's controlling federal forces. He's controlling intelligence services. He's doing that. And so by doing so, we see that the crimes that were committed on the ground and then those that were foreseeable from those original crimes, and those were all included in the indictment. So we've got murder, rape, torture, hostage taking. I mean, I have to look at the indictment to get all the specifics of it. They're pages and pages long, but
which are not forms of cleansing. Like, it's so strange to me that we call this ethnic cleansing. You know, it's like we're giving these people a bath. No, they were murdering these people, like atrociously.
Yeah, they are.
People. Yeah.
I mean, you have tanks that go over their homes, and the people that are still inside.
Right.
So yeah,
it's crazy. It's just an odd term that we still use on the side of even the individuals that are studying the atrocities. We call it cleansing these people, but it's, let's call it what it is.
Right. Let's call it what it is, because the thing is, it never happens a pure ethnic cleansing, which is atrocious to begin with. But that means, okay, we're expelling everybody from here. But it never happens that way. It never happens that way. They get murdered along the way. They get tortured. They get captured. They get unlawfully detained along the way. There's so many crimes there that are connected to it that it's never. And even if there weren't these other crimes, it's atrocious. You're absolutely right, Matt. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like anything you fight against, you make stronger. Anything you attempt to, the war against. The war against terror, I mean, now more and more terrorists are being created as we bomb these people. The war against drugs. Now, drugs are now more rampant than they were prior to the war on drugs. The war against infectious diseases with antibiotics. We're now using antibiotics, of course, but we're making the potential for some sort of a super bug to come in and destroy everything, to be resistant to these antibiotics. And then what do? We're screwed. So it's like, that's Milosevic, right? It's attempting to, or Hitler or whoever, attempting to cleanse the world of a certain ethnic population, and not knowing that, the thing that it is that's in your mind as the other, the bad guy that you're attempting to cleanse, that you're attempting to murder, destroy, get rid of, always comes back stronger and bigger force than when you went after it. So.
It's funny you say about the antibiotics, because when I lived in the Netherlands, those physicians are reluctant to give us antibiotics. And really, my son, my youngest son, he was sick, and we finally had to take him to Belgium to get his antibiotics. I think he really needed it, and he finally got it, but we couldn't get it in. They will give it, but they want to try everything else first, and they're right. They are right, because of exactly what you just said.
Yeah. But you got him. Right?
Yeah. No, I got him. Yeah.
Yeah. No, you got the leader was what was his sentence?
Okay, Slobodan Milosevic. Very interesting. I'm glad you asked that question.
Can't pronounce his name, but
yeah. I don't think most people pronounce it right. Technically, it would be Milosevic, but no one ever pronounces that way. Milosevic. He died before the sentence, and the prosecution was just about completed. He's in a prison in an area of The Hague called Scheveningen. Really hard word to pronounce. In fact, during the Second World War, if a Dutchman thought that maybe a German was pretending to be Dutch, they would ask him to pronounce Scheveningen, and if they couldn't pronounce it right, then they knew that they were German. So there's no way that I'm getting it close. But it's a beautiful place. It's right on the North Sea, very windy, and there's a prison there. And the prison was actually used during World War II as well, where the Germans did imprison Dutch resistance fighters and others in that prison, and they executed many of them. When the word of the ceasefire came out, they went in there and executed these people. It was just incredible. I think they took them to a dune, sand dune, where they did that. So, but in this prison, which is still a Dutch prison, the United Nations rented, for lack of a better term, a wing of the prison that was used for the United Nations to hold prisoners pending trial. And Milosevic was one of those. And they were treated, as I understand it, fairly well. They got to play cards. Even if they were on different sides, once they were in there, they all seemed to get along. And to go back to the way it was under this man called Josip Broz Tito, who wanted brotherhood in Yugoslavia, wanted everybody to be together and to be united, and so they all got along, fairly well before the war. But when Tito died, eventually, that's what caused Yugoslavia to crumble and to have these fights over the land. So Milosevic was in there, and he had some type of heart problem, and he wanted to go to Moscow to receive medical treatment. You got to remember that, or keep in mind that the Russians are Orthodox mostly, and the Serbs are Orthodox. So there's this Orthodox connection between Serbia and Russia, and there's no doubt about it, even in cooperation, when we were investigating Serb offenses, that we didn't get the same level of cooperation from the Russians as we did from other countries. So he wanted to go to Moscow, and he was being examined by Dutch physicians. And the United Nations said, no, we're not allowing you. No, you can take the treatment from here. So he ends up dead. And they find a drug in his system that was that hadn't been prescribed by the Dutch physicians. So somebody smuggled this drug in there, whether it was a lawyer or a prison guard, I have no idea. But somehow someone got this drug in there. Now, what I think...
Is it the drug that killed him?
It is the drug that killed him.
Okay. So he committed suicide.
Well, some people say he committed suicide. Some people say he was murdered, that he was administered, the conspiracy theory.
Sure.
And it was investigated, I think, by the Dutch police, who had jurisdiction over this, and the Dutch coroner's office. They worked on that together. We didn't, because it wasn't a war crime. And the national authorities had the jurisdiction. But I think that somebody in the tribunal, was connected with that, and they were involved with that on a daily basis.
Ryan, while we continue to talk, just ask ChatGPT what it thinks the percentage chances are for this to have been a murder versus suicide versus other. I'm just curious what AI thinks is the more probable kind of a thing. What are your thoughts on
but my theory, and the pun is intended, is that he was playing a game of Russian roulette with the medication. He wanted to make his condition look worse than what it was, so he could go. So the United Nations would allow him to go to Russia for the medical treatment. He just lost that game. the cylinder was loaded, and he pulled the trigger, and he got hit with the bullet.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
Metaphorically speaking.
Yeah, that makes sense for sure. Okay. So
Let's see what we got here.
So it sounds like chat is less informed than you are on this.
Well, I don't. I mean, 80 to 90% say a heart attack. Well, it probably was a heart attack.
Right.
But what caused it? And
Right.
and this medication was in his system.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And
I think
see, yeah, it's not getting into the medication at all, is it?
No, I think it's
No.
Yeah, you still can't completely trust AI, unfortunately.
Yeah. Although it can be quite interesting.
For sure.
And you should look up sometime. I don't know if Ryan, if you're interested in, or Matt, a guy by the name of Slobodan Praljak, Praljak. And he appealed. I was involved in a case. I investigated a case that was indirectly involving him. It wasn't my case. But he had been convicted, and he appealed his conviction. And then when he was in court, and it's all on tape. That's why, if Ryan, if you could look up his suicide in court, once the judge said, you lose your appeal, whatever he said, you're guilty, Praljak picks up a glass that's on his table. It's right there. How did this get there? And I think he says, I'm drinking poison. And he picked it up and he throws it down his throat. And he was taken away by ambulance and was dead. Again, how did the drugs get in there? There's a lot of these things that were happening in the court and in the prison. There was another case, a man by the name of Milan Babic, who I did investigate. He'd been a dentist, but he's caught up in all this national. Okay, let's watch this.
Affirms the sentence of 20 years of imprisonment, subject to credit being given under Rule 101C of the rules for the period he has already spent in detention. Mr. Praljak, you may be seated.
Suci, Slobodan Praljak nije ratni zločinac. S prijezirom odbacujem vašu presudu.
Stop, please. Please sit down.
No shit. That guy was just sentenced to 20 years and he just stood up. What the hell did he say? Then he just drank poison?
Yeah.
What did he say?
I think he said, I'm drinking poison.
Wow.
I don't accept this. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But something to the extent that I'm drinking poison. I don't accept this. And that's that.
That was a part of this whole investigation.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
For crimes that were committed in Bosnia, allegedly by Croats and Bosnian Croats. So where was I before Praljak?
Oh, we were several spots. I had a crazy thought.
Okay.
And wanted to share this with you. Thinking about, I talked about AI and kind of brought that up, and thinking about kind of like the future state a little bit, because we know we got AI coming and it's getting smarter and smarter. Our artificial general intelligence will be here probably in a couple of years, and then maybe sooner. You've got robotics that are coming up, and when those things start to combine and you've got robots mixed with AI, it's going to get really interesting. And AI is already starting to eliminate human jobs from like desk jobs, computer jobs. We're going to, as agents become more and more of a thing, it does your job. Your agent does your job for you on the computer. We're going to have, I think, a lot of unemployment globally, nationally, globally, as this technology continues to get adopted. And it starts to take people's jobs from behind computers. But then when you start to combine AI and robotics and you think about, okay, well, now you've got robots that are able to do tasks, and it'll start off in factories with jobs where they have to stand in front of a certain spot and move things and put things into boxes or whatever, but then it'll get into more advanced things. It'll get into things like you can be a plumber, you can be a robot plumber, you can be a robot gardener. You can take care of people's lawns outside, ride around in mowers and mow their lawns. And then you start thinking about displacing some jobs like policemen or firefighters. And this is what I wanted to ask you about and get your thoughts on, because again, this just kind of like the policeman thing just kind of hit me yesterday. When they start to take those jobs, firefighters and policemen, there's going to be an overwhelming acceptance to that happening because of the amount of trauma that those individuals go through, like police and firefighters. It's constant trauma. With a firefighter robot, he can just run into a house. He can run straight through the fire. He can pick the baby out of the bed, save the baby, come out, maybe he's walking by a couple of dead people. He doesn't experience any trauma. He doesn't have that, lifelong impact to him and or her. And that's going to be, I think, one of the selling points to allow this to happen. And it'll be the same with the police force. And so we're going to have these state-operated police forces that are robotic.
Like RoboCop.
Like RoboCop, exactly. And then we're going to have, of course, at the federal level, we're going to have the military. We're going to have robots from the military. They're going to have drones. They're going to be able to use these drones. They're going to be self-automated. It's not just going to be Teslas that are self-automated. I saw a car, it was a Jaguar that was a complete self-driving car yesterday on the road in front of us driving to the airport for just wild. But that is going to be at the military level too, where you have tanks that are self-driving and able to scan the situation and make decisions. The police officers are going to be able to go onto a crime scene. The police officer robots are going to be able to scan all the information, not contaminate anything. They're going to be able to recreate via AI intelligence exactly what happened when different things happen. There's going to be no subjectivity to it anymore. We're going to get to answers on crimes, and these are all going to be the selling points for allowing a robotic police force and federal army to be able to exist out there.
Right.
I think this is kind of where things are going. If you just kind of play out what's happening with technology and, kind of like what humans are ultimately going to decide to do, take the violence out for humans, let robots figure it out. But then they've got all the power. Like they've got, now we have a robotic police force that's growing in intelligence exponentially, annually, year after year after year, getting smarter, making its own decisions, programming itself, not becoming conscious necessarily. Everybody's kind of hung up on this consciousness thing. Are they conscious? Are they not conscious? It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. They are going to have the intelligence of millions of times more intelligent than the combined human species. They're going to be able to decide to do whatever they want, and they're going to have the weapons to do whatever they want. And so us walking outside to a park, us walking, driving down the road, doing whatever we want, you can imagine a scenario that's completely controlled by a police force or whatever it is, a military or wherever the funding goes, that just does whatever it wants. It controls us however it wants to. We have no individual. It can tell us to do whatever it wants to do, and we have to follow those laws and those rules. It can extinguish us if it chooses to. We've now been at that point. We've been domesticated by robots, just like humans domesticated wolves, thousands of years ago. Okay, this sounds good. These things will protect us. Well, they'll feed us. They'll pet us. They'll be nice to us. And all of a sudden they have complete control over us. So I just, that image of kind of where we're going, I feel like we're going to get to the point where as a civilization, we're going to have to make those decisions. And is this something that we want? Is this the future that we want? And it's going to be left to individual countries and individuals. So, some countries will decide, yes, this is what we want. And some countries will decide, no, this is not what we want. And then countries that decide, hey, this is what we want, they have all the power. They have all the control because they have superior armies and militaries, and the ones that don't. So most countries, it seems like, are probably going to decide, hey, yeah, I'm going to adopt this. I'm going to give the robots the power to control, to rule the general population.
Right.
So, I mean, I guess my thought is, my question for you is, if there is even a question, is just kind of a thought experiment, really, and kind of where we're headed. But I see this being like a revolution where you have people on both sides of the of the coin, trying to make this decision, is this the way we should go or not? In a situation like yours, of course, there's no need for, like I said, when it eliminates these jobs, there's no need for what you're doing. AI has taken that job by sending in robots to scan the area to see what happened, to interrogate people, to question people, and to process all of that information, to know whether they're lying, to be able to read their retinas to see if they're sweating, to make those decisions for us. Like, it completely, there's really no need for humans to do much of anything in this type of world where AI and robotics have combined, and they're super, highly. Right. So I guess, I'm just thinking about kind of the future of your job and this, and seeing if you've given this scenario any thought, and, kind of what your thoughts are.
It's a wonderful question. I had never given it any thought to the level that you just conveyed. But I have been asked in class, in law school, well, what about cybercrime? What about the use of the drones? What about the use of this technology? And my answer is that it doesn't matter what type. There's nothing unlawful to use these. It's how they're used. So if a robot went in as a combatant, that's okay. There's nothing that prevents that from happening. But if those robots are killing civilians, if those robots are committing crimes that humans heretofore had been committing, well, the robot can't be held individually criminally responsible. But the ultimate objective is to hold those people in power, just like we did trying to go after Slobodan Milosevic, hold the people that that should be most accountable, most responsible for that. And I think we can do that. So it doesn't change that, but we haven't gotten to the level that you just said, like replacing the war crimes investigator. But the mere fact that the robots and the technology and they're committing the crimes per se, really, they're doing that at the behest as a proxy for people who can be held accountable. But another thing that's interesting that you said, is about the police. Well, now we don't normally hold anybody criminally responsible for what a police officer does, other than the individual that does, the police officer, if they break the law. If they were to shoot and kill somebody intentionally, unlawfully, then that person is held responsible. I'm not saying that there aren't some circumstances where maybe the superior told them to do it and there's been a conspiracy but normally nothing like that happens. But what if that robot does that? We're going to have to start looking at holding others responsible for what the mistakes that the robots make. Let's say that they're mistakes. So do we have a manslaughter? Do we have a murder? What do we have, and who are we holding responsible? The mayor, the governor, the police chief, the sergeant? I don't know, but someone has to be held responsible for that. I don't think you can just simply say, well, the robot did it. And because in war, you could say, well, it was an errant missile. You can say that, and that. But if it was continuous and you were continuing to do it, how come you didn't stop it? So if the robot makes a mistake, how come you didn't stop the robot? I mean, that's what you should be doing, is taking it, having it examined and maybe reprogrammed. But if you allow it to continue, then there's going to be some criminal culpability on somebody. We do it for the military now.
And will you be able to stop it from continuing?
I don't know.
Is the question. Yeah. But also, even rewinding prior to that, is it like, I've got full self-driving on my car right now, Tesla, and that's AI. It never makes a mistake. It never makes a mistake. Like, it's crazy. And AI right now is so primitive that it's, compared to what it's going to be, that you can imagine this in a robot. And I think humans are going to be okay with the rate at which a mistake is made by AI. If a mistake is made by AI in the future, because it's going to be far less mistakes than humans actually make, like infinitely less mistakes than humans actually make. The question is, and when it gets dangerous, is less about mistakes and more about when they decide what's right for society and the decisions that they're making based on what they're seeing. And then that takes it out of the human ability to judge and to say, this is right, this is wrong. this is good, this is bad. Now, none of that matters. It's what the robot thinks is the right thing to do and the wrong thing to do.
And my answer to that, I'll use a Scottish expression, it's beyond the ken. You know, I have no way of knowing something like that.
Nobody does.
Yeah.
Nobody does. That's the craziest part. Even all of the people that are responsible with developing this technology right now, none of them know the end game. None of them understand the end game of what it looks like and what's going to happen and what the risks are. Everybody is like, yeah, you know, there's a 1 out of 5 chance they're going to kill all of us. And we're okay with that because these people are going to become billionaires in this. These are the people that are working on this technology that are going to benefit from it. So everybody's okay with the downside, and they're really focused on seeing what the possible upside is. And there's tremendous upside, but is it, it's worth it for them to kind of flip the coin. But for the rest of us, you know, who are kind of just sitting here like, as people are working on this tech with absolutely no vision or insight or understanding as to what the future looks like. I'm not going to say it's scary or terrifying because it's not. It's just what it is. But we need to talk about it. Like in conversations like this are important because it gets people thinking about it, gets people talking about it, and gets people interested in, you know, actually preparing for what that future looks like so that we can do things now so that we don't end up in a future that nobody wants to be in.
Well, I think the question that you're asking is a real reasonable question. Some people may say, come on, that's never going to happen. Well, they could have said that a long time ago about the flip phone that Star Trek used, you know, beam me up, Scotty. Now we have, I mean, the flip phones are out now. I mean, we've gone way beyond that. Art does imitate life. Right? No, I want to get it the other way. Life is imitating art. That's really what I want to say. And we're going to see that. We're going to see, I think, if it progresses with this artificial intelligence, we may see things that were in science fiction movies 50 years ago where robots are coming after us. I mean, who knows?
Who knows? Yeah. And it is going to progress. Like there's no doubt about the fact that it's going to progress and it's going to get to this point. So if it's not an if, it gets to this future that I'm describing. If it doesn't get to this future I'm describing, it's because humans have collectively, intentionally, and globally made the choice not to go in this direction. It would be the first time in human history that we've said, no, I don't really want that technology. I don't want that advancement. I don't want to live at the pinnacle of scientific and technological advancement. I'll pass. That would be the first time that would ever happen if somehow we just globally shut down the project and hope that of AI and robotics and hope that there's not certain countries that are not doing it underneath the radar for militaristic or power purposes.
I don't think we'll ever have that collective agreement.
Never.
No.
So it's going to happen. So it's like, so you know, that's just kind of where we are. It's crazy, but we can probably move off of the AI topic, but thank you for going down that route.
All right. No, thanks for the great question.
Yeah. It's an interesting thought experiment that I think we really as a society need to start thinking about. So, but well, good. So that was a huge part of your career. It was a huge part of your kind of, and now you're able to share a lot of those experiences with additional people. Thank you for doing that here on the show today. Thank you for educating your students about this because it's, you know, if we don't understand history, then we're going to be destined to repeat history. So critical the way that you're kind of able to highlight this important epic episode of human history. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess then one of the other big topics that you're familiar with, if you're good to move there now, would be the end of World War II.
Yeah.
And how did this kind of begin for you and as it relates to your interest in and study of the end of World War II with Hitler and kind of what happened there, and it ended up getting you onto the History Channel, I guess?
It was,
right?
yeah, Hunting Hitler on the History Channel.
Right.
So I was approached. I got an email, and I had several emails and phone calls from a production company that wanted to know if I would be interested in being a co-host for Hunting Hitler, one season, and this was the premise. The premise was that and this was in 2015, right around there, that the United States government had just recently declassified thousands of documents related to what happened to Hitler at the time of the Soviets, the end of the Second World War. What really happened to Hitler? I said, okay, that's great. Well, send me some of those documents. I want to see them. I'm not taking anything based on somebody's word. I want to see some of those documents. So they emailed them to me, and I'm looking at U.S. government documents, some from the FBI, some from the CIA, redacted. But you could see that after the Second World War, the U.S. government, as well as other governments, according to these documents, were still looking for Adolf Hitler. And I was like, what? What are you doing looking for Adolf Hitler? Where everybody knows he committed suicide in the Fuhrer bunker. I mean, I knew that, and I knew that as a kid. And isn't this really a done story? And so, and I also said this, and I'll bring up Geraldo Rivera, and I like Geraldo, but you had this show where it was the something in Chicago. It was where Al Capone had all his treasure or something like that. And it was all the suspense, and lo and behold, they opened it up and there was nothing there. And I said, I don't want something like that. I want to do that. So if Geraldo is watching this, you are a cool dude, but and I like everything that you do, but I didn't want that ending. Because Geraldo was really a good guy. And so I said, I don't want that. I said, I have a reputation. And I think they wanted me because I was a real war crimes investigator. And these are good people that are contacting me, and I have a lot of respect for them. And I was the only real war crimes investigator. There was another investigator, Lenny DePaul, who was with the U.S. Marshal Service. He was brought in. He was straight up. My co-host was Bob Baer, a former CIA case officer who does an incredible job. He's got a lot of charisma. He can do non-scripted work, hands down. I can't even come close to what he can do. He really does a good job. And there were others. And I knew that. And when they said Bob Baer was going to be on it, because I had seen him on CNN, and he'd done some really nice commentaries on CNN relative to things in the Middle East and assassinations, and he's very good. A lot of charisma, a lot of good camera presence, and he's a really funny guy. A lot of good one-liners that I'm still laughing at him. And so I said, yeah, I want to see these things. And so I saw the documents. I saw who else they were bringing on. I was assured that it wouldn't be, a Bigfoot hunt, or something like that. And because I said, again, I still testify in court. I still do consulting. I don't want to end up looking, silly. So, I did. I went and I jumped on that, and I went to L.A. several times. That's where the studio was, something, nice like this. And they had everything set up, the board there and different things with Hitler. And it was a real nice setup. And so the premise was the government was still looking for him. Let's follow the trail. But before we get to the trail, which I think was great, let's follow the trail. Okay, we can follow the trail because Nazis did go to Argentina. So this is going to be fun. Nazis did go to Colombia. Nazis did go to Paraguay. And I'm going to get to that.
In the aftermath of the war.
In the aftermath of the Second World War, high ranking. But did Hitler escape? Here was the other issue concerning Hitler. At the end of the war, or towards the end of the war, the Soviets had bombed the Fuhrer bunker. And Hitler had married Eva Braun just a couple days before then, his mistress, but he marries her. Joseph Goebbels, he is a high-ranking Nazi member. He's in the Fuhrer bunker with his wife and I think 6 children. He murders all of them, and it is murder, although he may call it a coup de grace or something like that, where it's a mercy killing, giving them cyanide so they're not tortured by the Soviets when they come in, but it's still a murder. It's the killing of one human being by another human being unlawfully. And he commits suicide. And the Soviets come in, and they have this intelligence organization that I read recently that Putin has brought it back. It's called SMERSH, SMERSH, which perhaps the acronym stands for this, but it means death to spies. And so they came in there. These aren't crime scene officers. Nowadays you would, the United States government, if it was the Army Criminal Investigation Division, or somebody would come in and they would process the crime scene. I mean, as we did with Osama bin Laden. I mean, taking DNA, photographs, doing all of that. There's proof. Well, but there's some things that people would talk about that because we don't have the body. So what really happened? But there's no crime scene. And they went in there and they bungled it big time. And they're not qualified to do anything like that. And there were remains. There were several remains that were out there. Some of it was commingled. And so they took these remains and they took them. They were still in Berlin. They took them to a suburb of Berlin. And there's an autopsy done, and then it seems as though, they were still commingled, and they were confused as to this skull goes to which mandible, and how does something like that happen? But they did, and so they had that. And then the Soviets took it to a military base in East Berlin. Because it becomes East Berlin. We didn't have East Berlin yet. It was only Berlin. But now it's being divided into the 4 sectors. And I've been there. And so you got the French sector, the Soviet sector, the British sector, and the American sector. They take it to the Soviet sector, which is East Berlin. And I've been in East Berlin when it was East Berlin, going through Checkpoint Charlie there as a young person. And so they took there and they did the autopsies, did everything they had to do, and then they kept the skull and the mandible and cremated everything else because they said that they didn't want, or the claim was that they didn't want some type of shrine, and we didn't want that with Osama bin Laden. And all we have to do is look at the shrine of Jim Morrison in Paris, and they didn't want that, and that's nothing against Jim Morrison, great music, but I think it is a problem for the French. And then they closed that base down, and they wanted to know what to do with everything, and they sent the mandible and the skull. They sent it to Moscow. So what else is going on at this time? Well, after the Second World War, which is ending in April. This is all happening in the end of April 1945. In May of 1945, this something that they called the Potsdam Conference in Berlin. And Stalin was there, Truman was there, a lot of people were there. And so it's been reported that Stalin told Truman that he didn't know what happened to Hitler. Hitler was missing. They didn't have him. Then there was another report that he was simply evasive as to what happened. And this is creating or conjuring these conspiracy theories, because this is all going to lead to these documents that are, well, where is Adolf Hitler, that are in these documents that are now declassified. So which one was it? Well, like I did when I worked on that show, I took a very investigative and clinical approach. I went and I looked at the archive document, and there is a document in the archives on the Potsdam Conference, and I could see exactly what Stalin had said. And Stalin had said, look, we think he may be in Argentina, but he may be in Japan, but we don't have him. Now, I believe, And I think the evidence will eventually show that they did. They had the mandible in the skull. But one theory, and it's probably right, but then there's no way that Stalin didn't know this. I mean, the intelligence, the Soviet intelligence is not going to lie or hold something back from Stalin. So he just wanted to give the whole idea to the Americans. You didn't have the ultimate victory, and you can go chase whoever you want. And that now, at that moment, they're getting the Cold War begins almost immediately. The space race is right around the corner. And so let the Americans go chase where Hitler is, because they're not going to find anything.
Right.
But what did happen is some very interesting things. They couldn't find his dentist, Dr. Hugo Blaschke. I don't remember what happened. I don't remember if he was dead. I don't think so. Maybe they just hadn't found him. But they did have a dental assistant, 2 dental assistants. They had different titles, but it was a woman, Kathy Hooserman, I think, and then there was another gentleman, and they made drawings of the mandible and the teeth and everything. They included all 32 teeth. And a lot of skeptics said, how can anybody remember everything about his bridge? He had extensive bridge work. How could they remember? It has to be fictitious. It has to be fabricated. And that's what a judge would say in court. Like, if you know all that, this is so rehearsed, it's impossible. So that's what's negatively impacting these diagrams at the time, at least from from different people's perspectives. This has to be fabricated because nobody can be so accurate. And I think the 2 diagrams were almost exact, and they were given at different times to different people by different people. That's hard to fathom. So you've got those drawings, and you've got those drawings. And so what do we make of that? And so it's everything's mucked up, and we know that. And that here we have these declassified documents, and we're going to follow the trail. Well, what if Hitler got out? Because evidence, well, I would also tell you this. There was a scientist from the University of Connecticut that I think in 2009 had been given access to the skull and took DNA from a section of the skull and said, and this was supposed to be Hitler's, and said it was of a woman. So now, I mean, this is in the mix. So it really is, everything is really bungled. And so now they're giving this scientist a skull saying it's Hitler's, and he's declaring that it's a woman. And you have the Schmersh that were there, and there's no records. And
whatever happened with that from 2009 with them calling it a woman? Did they get to the end of that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we follow all of this, and we go off. And I was mostly in Los Angeles as a co-host, and they had other people. I did go to Colombia on some of this, but Argentina, Chile. I mean, I could talk about some of these countries and what they found. Yes, found artifacts, Nazi artifacts, Nazis that were there. Look, we know Adolf Eichmann was in Buenos Aires. In 1960, the Mossad and Shin Bet, the 2 intelligence services of Israel, worked together, and they came and abducted Adolf Eichmann. And they dressed him as a pilot for Air Israel, and scooted off on a plane, an Israeli plane there in Buenos Aires, and took him back against the wishes of the Buenos Aires government, because they had, at the time, they were leaning toward Hitler, and toward that fascist side. And there was some collaboration between Argentina and the Nazis.
And that's why it was such an attractive location for them to go to.
That's one. Yeah. And Chile, there had always been, not always, but land had been given free to Germans many decades earlier, because the Chilean government didn't want the Argentinians to come in and take that land. So they gave it free to the Germans. And I can tell you, I've flown to Chile from Germany, from Frankfurt, and half the plane are speaking Spanish and German, and they're going to Chile, and they have their own little colonies there, colonial dignidad, and they still have them. They still have such a strong presence there. So Nazis were attracted to go to Chile, Paraguay, Uruguay, Argentina for different types of connections with the Nazis. So it was great. It was interesting. It was feasible that we would undertake this. If Hitler got out, how did he get there? Looking at the rat lines through Spain, the Vatican was alleged to have helped them escape. There's just all sorts of interesting conspiracy theories, but some of it is truth to some of it because these people did get there.
What were the biggest, so as it relates to Hitler specifically, maybe for a second, what were the biggest conspiracies or the biggest kind of maybe facts that happened that you think actually was really good evidence that he did go to wherever, Argentina or wherever?
Well, you have Stalin, telling, and I looked at the memo, it's right there, telling Truman or telling the Americans that they don't know, he doesn't know where Hitler is, and he thinks that Hitler is in South America. And then there was something about Japan too, but South America made more sense because of all these connections. So if you got Stalin saying that and saying everything was too confusing, and that's number one. Then we also looked at plans that Hitler had written up before the end of the Second World War, where he would escape if needed. And so there was Tempelhof Airport. And there's tunnels underneath Tempelhof Airport. Did he get from the Fuhrer bunker to Tempelhof and get up? There were people escaping. And like I said, Adolf Eichmann, there's also Josef Mengele, the Angel of Death, who first went to Paraguay, assumed the name Jose. Then he went to another country. I forget which one that was. And he took the name Wolfgang. And then his body was found in I think maybe it was Uruguay where his body was found, and he had drowned. He had a stroke and he had drowned. So his body was found down there in South America. That's a fact. His body is there. Adolf, and these are big people in the Nazi Party. He's down there. Adolf Eichmann is down there, abducted by the Israeli intelligence services. So there's two. So we know that these. But what about Hitler? Coming back to your question. Well, again, Stalin making his comments. Coming from someone at that level, you would think that there's something to it.
Yeah.
And because wouldn't he want to say, yes, we got there. We got to Berlin first. We took Berlin. The Soviets took Berlin, not the Americans, not the French or the Brits. We got his body. That makes sense. And for him to say, we don't know what happened to him, that to me that doesn't give any credibility or lend credibility to Stalin. Well, maybe he doesn't have much credibility. I don't know.
He's just trolling us, I guess.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Troll.
Yeah. So there were things that showed plans for escape. Then other so-called facts, a little bit more tenuous, I suppose, are these reports where Hitler was seen. He was spotted. He was spotted in Spain. He was spotted on a submarine and coming up in Argentina. He was spotted in Colombia and all of this. Okay. So you got him being spotted, but we'll get to that. But okay, it's in these now declassified U.S. government documents. We know what Stalin said. We know he had plans to get out there. Did he really commit suicide? Did he really die in the Fuhrer bunker in April or May of 1945? The question at that point was ambiguous. And I had thought that it was this would be a good exercise. It would be fun. It could be entertaining. And some people think, well, why do you make Hitler entertaining, but Hitler captures. Hitler and the assassination of JFK and aliens, they capture the imagination of a lot of people. And the History Channel really places a lot of that on there. But look, I wasn't into aliens or Bigfoot or any of that. I looked at the evidence that was presented to me.
Don't offend Ross over there.
Okay, yeah. I've been checking them out, yeah. I checked things out, and I wanted to keep my about Ross. Well, I did get a phone call from some guy from Australia after I was on the History Channel, and he kept calling me. After that, I disconnected my home phone, and now I just keep my cell phone. Like, how did you get my home phone number? But I guess people can do what they can do. He had some kind of object that he thought was from another planet. So, I had to disconnect my phone.
Give him my number.
Yeah, there you go. I should have done that. Yeah. And you're right. It would be a good discussion. But by calling my home, it kind of concerned me.
Yeah, for sure.
And I said, no, I don't want. Next thing is going to be a car in front of the house.
Exactly.
And although I do protect myself, no doubt.
Yep.
And
I have to. But you wanted closure on this thing. You wanted. I mean, I think that's got to be a big part of it. Like to have closure on the Hitler thing, and like, did he really escape? Did he really kill himself? I mean, that matters for people. He genocide. I mean, he murdered tons and tons of people. It has a huge place in history. So it's like, getting that closure of like what really happened here is a pretty big deal.
Yeah,
So
I think it did come to the closure on that. So in season 2, somewhere along the season 1 was fantastic, even though it was came on at 10 o'clock. I think my wife and I watched the first 15 minutes of it, and we both fell asleep. It's not that it was bad. They did a fantastic job. It's just that, and I've heard this from people, they don't watch their own show. But I will watch this one, okay? I'm going to watch this podcast.
Good.
But we didn't. And because I knew the story, because I was there. But season 1 was done superb. All of them really were. The camera crew, the producer, using drones to capture things, doing what Ryan is doing. They had a whole team that could do that. They were out of this world. They really did a great job. And everybody I spoke to about Hunting Hitler loved the show. And that's one of the things that they had to say, was just the way that it was produced. And the producer, the executive producer, did a great job. And I still stay in contact with some of these folks. Great people. So, but in season 2, I did find the conclusive forensic evidence that Hitler had died. And I want to talk about that. And I want to talk about Martin Bormann, who was another big figure in the Nazi Party, who, he comes into this too, that he escaped because nobody knew where Martin Bormann was. And it's true that they didn't know. So was he with Eichmann? Was he with Mengele? Where was he? And of course, we got Hitler in this big question.
Well, let's do it. Let's take a quick break for lunch.
Okay.
And we'll come back and maybe kick off the second part of the conversation with that.
All right. Sounds great. I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome.
All right.
Me too.
Okay.
Good. All right. Welcome back.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for lunch. It was great.
It was a good lunch, right?
It certainly was.
So the only thing that's changed in this room since we left is we now have a book here.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So
I wonder how that happened.
I don't know, magic. But if you can let us know, what is this book? This has to do with our prior conversation.
It does. And it is a book about my experiences as a war crimes investigator. The subtitle, in fact, which you probably can't read, the title is The Devil's Garden. There's a story behind that. And then the subtitle is A War Crimes Investigator Story. Where I did go was one of the areas where my ancestors came from in Croatia. And it's a heavily forested area. It was called Hortus Diabolicus by the Romans, the Devil's Garden. So I wanted to spin that in there. And it is where my ancestors came from. And then while I was there, I went and visited cousins, second cousins and third cousins, and brought all the family together with cooking a lamb on a spit. It was It was very nice.
Very cool.
And drinking the Slivovitz, which is like Italian grappa, homemade strong stuff. And they start very early in the morning.
Right. So you can find this on Amazon then, is that right? Yep.
You can find it there, and there are copies. They were all sold.
Yep.
And it's going to be republished, and so there'll be more coming. And so, but they can still obtain copies. But if they're patient, if there's none there'll be some more soon.
Very cool.
A reprinting.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, it's a good addition to our little studio
There
here
you
for this
there-
back half.
there you
So,
go. All right.
well, good. So then we were kind of going to get into some of the forensics involved with the Hitler
Yeah.
thing and kind of how he, how you've kind of drawn your conclusion and how
Right.
you're really comfortable with your
Right.
conclusion.
Very comfortable.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. Yep. So during season 2, as I mentioned before, I was very clinical. I'm a real investigator, so I investigated, and I don't take anything on face value. It doesn't matter who it's coming from, usually. And so I dig deeper.
Stalin or anybody.
Any of that. Yeah, no, not Stalin. Yeah. I would love to be sitting here talking to him. I got a lot of questions for him. Yeah. One time, there were some documents from Argentina, and I can speak Spanish. I can get around, okay? But I had my wife, who's a native Spanish speaker. I said, look, would you do me a favor? I want you to call the Minister of Interior, or Ministry, not to speak to the minister, but the Ministry of Interior in Argentina, and tell them, and she's a professor, and I said, tell them that you're my assistant, and you need certain information. So she did. She called down to Argentina and said that she was Dr. Cencich's PA, and that we needed this information, and told them a little bit about who I was. Oh, yes, ma'am. Si, senora. We'll get everything for you. And they got all the information that I wanted, and I got it. She translated it into English for me, and so I verified facts that were presented to me. Some of them I was able to see they were true, and some of them they weren't. It's nobody's fault, but I wanted to know what the truth was. And I did this with everything. So coming to the forensic evidence, I dug deeper and deeper and deeper. And I saw that in 1972, and I'm off the top of my head, I could be off on the year, but I think it was 1972, there was a Norwegian, well, he was perhaps became an American citizen because he was in the United States, but he was originally from Norway, scientist, odontologist, forensic odontologist, teeth. He'd been teaching at the Harvard and doing medicine, undertaking dental medicine at the Harvard Medical School, and became the first dean of the UCLA Medical School. No slouch, okay? And he worked with other scientists. It was peer-reviewed throughout the globe, not just in the United States. And he examined certain artifacts. Well, what happened was this. This is such an interesting story. That prior to that, it could have been 1970, 1969, before he does the examination, that there had been some architectural work, engineering work in Berlin, West Berlin, and near the Lehrtar railroad station. And they were excavating some things, and they found the remains of 2 people, 1972. Now remember, Martin Bormann is missing. Martin Bormann was last seen in the company of one of Hitler's doctors, a guy by the name of Stepfeger, I believe. I might be mispronouncing the last name. And there was a third person there, Arthur Axmann, who was the head of the Nazi Youth Party. Well, they're there trying to escape. They had been at the Fuhrer bunker, and the 3 of them are beating feet. They're trying to get out of the Russians or the Soviets. They're there, and they're trying to get out. Fire is going here and there, mortars, and Arthur Axmann says, "I'm not staying," and he gets out, and he gets away. He says, last time I saw them, the 2 of them were together. Somebody else came by, I can't remember who it was, and they thought that they had seen these 2 people deceased. I'm not 100% sure on who that was. It could have been Axeman again, but someone saw the two people deceased in that vicinity. So, well, the railroad station was built over this. And we have all these sightings of Martin Bormann, that he's in South America. He's a high-ranking party official. And that came up. Stalin talked about him. Other people talked about him. But when they were doing this excavation at the railroad, the remains of two individuals, deceased individuals, were unearthed, and they did the examination. He does an examination. Let's just focus on one of them, and he is able to determine that it is Bormann, and because of dental records, and he can see that it was clearly him. I mean, in hunting Hitler, people said that Martin Bormann, and it's not hunting Hitler's fault, it's not their fault, but people were saying while we were doing this show that he was buried in one of the South American countries. I don't remember which one they claimed he was buried in. And, well, so I produced this. So, well, he can't be buried in South America. Here's unequivocal analysis, determination that Martin Bormann was one of the individuals here. He had been seen there. Arthur Axeman put him there. And now the bodies, and he gets away. He was with two people, and the bodies of two people are there. And Dr., let's see if I get his name, Ryder Sugnes. And pardon my pronunciation there on the Norwegian.
It's
but
close enough. Okay.
And he does the examination, and based upon dental records and also reconstruction of the skull with X-rays, he determines that it is Martin Bormann. So he was never buried down there. But someone comes up with the bright hypothesis that perhaps he was. You ready for this? Perhaps he was exhumed from the grave in South America, and somehow he was buried in the same spot that he was seen in Berlin. All right, impossible. I don't know who came up with that, but it's just no way. But we'll let that slide. The big thing is Hitler, and so the same Dr. Sugnes, the same forensic odontologist, he is able to examine the photographs or the diagrams that had been produced by these two dental assistants that I had mentioned to you before, Kathy Hausman and another, who at one time had been in custody of the Soviets. They got them to write statements, and they were the ones that did the diagrams. So he has those. But now look, unbeknownst to a lot of people, and this is big, the United States government and our archives here in College Park, Maryland, held X-rays of Hitler's head. So the Soviets had the skull and the mandible, not sharing that with us. We had the X-rays, not sharing that with them. And so what does he do? And why do we have these X-rays? Well, there's different theories, different statements. One was a prior assassination attempt on Hitler, and I think there was a movie about that where a Nazi or a German went in there and tried to placed a bomb there, did go off, and that he had a concussion from this. Didn't kill him, obviously. And there was another theory that he had these sinus problems. I'm not sure which one it was. It doesn't really matter. He has these X-rays. And the X-rays are taken from different positions. The X-rays weren't there necessarily for the teeth. It was for either the sinuses or the concussion. nevertheless, he's able to take a look at those and examine them and forensically put the mandible together and compare that with the diagrams that had been drawn by the two dental assistants. And then he goes on and talks about the necessary degree of proof that he would need as basically as an expert witness to go into court. And I think he used a term that I'm not so sure that I don't recall what it was, but it was probably something like a preponderance of the evidence or a prima facie case, something that would say, yes, in a civil case, this is him. This is all you need to meet. The greater weight of the evidence, this is him. I looked at the numerical scores that he did, and we don't need to get into how he comes up with the mathematics, but I looked at his scoring, and he comes to the point, let's say it was 6 points to have this preponderance of the evidence. It goes way up, like to 26 points, which is conclusive. It's a full stop. There's no way that this is not Adolf Hitler. It's just no way. It's impossible, because you look at the extensive bridge work, you look at what he's missing, what he's not missing, where he has a prothesis, where he doesn't, all of that was drawn by two people exactly the same, and then his forensic reconstruction of those x-rays. This gives us conclusive proof, not just enough proof to make a case in a civil court, not even beyond a reasonable doubt, even more than that, beyond any doubt that that was Hitler. So I gave that information to the producers, and they were very glad to have it. They filmed me presenting it, kind of like I'm presenting it here, but I had the diagrams and had everything. And unfortunately, and I'm not being critical because I'm not in the movie business, and you know what my business is because I've already gone into that. But they said that a business decision, let's just put it that way, a business decision was that it wasn't going to be aired, and they wanted a season 3. So they wanted a season 3. There's a lot more to put into season 3, so I'm not saying that they're wrong.
They were making money. They didn't want it to end. And
I guess so, yeah. And
you think they wanted to come back and get to that later? Or
they never did.
They never did.
No. So what happened then was I thought that might be the case, but unfortunately it never happened. Then, so I wasn't there for season 3. And then after season 3, I think they did a special episode, or at least at the end of season 3. Bob Bear was still there, and there was another person that I think was a former retired female FBI agent that took my place, and they just said the search goes on, the hunt goes on. So, a year ago or so, I was contacted, and I have the email. I can't remember the name of the newspaper, and it's Daily something, but I'm not sure I remember exactly the name of it. So I don't want to say it was this, and then because there may be more than one than that. So this guy reaches out to me, this reporter. I said, well, I spoke to Bob Bear, and I'd like to talk to you about, Hitler. And, you did this years ago. What do you think? And he says, because Bob says, and I read the article, he says, well, Bob says that, the evidence is, the hunt should still go on. I said, well, really, I don't know why he's saying that, but he is, and I have a lot of respect for him. But I went through and I spent probably a half hour, 45 minutes, maybe an hour, telling him about all this forensic evidence and how conclusive it was, all right? And you can Google this up, but you hit one of those paywalls. And so I had to have the reporter send it back to me without that so I could read it. And, well, 9/10 of the article was Bob Bear talking about, how this could be him and the hunt should still go on. And then toward the end, and I don't care that I only got a little bite of it. The point I'm trying to make is the bite that I had and that was attributed to me. It says, well, Dr. Cencich is more cautious about this, more cautious. And Okay, well, what do you mean more cautious? I just told, and I wrote him back. I said, well, what do you mean more cautious? I just told you that it was incontrovertible, that evidence, conclusive evidence that it was him. It's not, I'm being more cautious. He died in 1945. And he said, but we got a lot of, I forget his term, but eyeballs on the paper or something like that. I don't remember what it was, but hey, we got a lot of readers and we're happy. And I said, well, I guess more cautious is the best I can get out of a tabloid. So I guess it's the nature of the business. And he wrote back and said, it is the nature of the beast. And we left it there. So people thrive on this Hitler. It's interesting. I mean, that's why I'm here today. That's why they did the show. And there's every reason for it. And I get emails constantly at work, at different places that I work. They Google me up. That's fine. They have more evidence about Hitler and all that. People love it. It is interesting. I find it interesting. So I don't fault anybody. But I'm here to tell you 100%. Hitler died in the inside his Fuhrer bunker. Now the French, we tried to get in. We tried to get into, and I had a connection with a Russian outlaw motorcycle gang. Well, we would call them an outlaw motorcycle gang, but I guess this motorcycle group was very well connected with Putin. So my connection had a connection with that outlaw motorcycle group. They went over there and talked to them, and they agreed that they would try to help and that we could come over. It never came to fruition. And so we never got in, and I thought that it would help. The French, in 2017 or 2019, I'm not sure which, there was a Dr. Charlier, Philippe Charlier, I think, and the Russians did give him access. And this is important because he examined it and determined that it was Hitler. And he faulted the 2009 American scientist, saying that he took DNA from a charred section of the skull, which wouldn't have been as valid. That's where he determined that it was a female, not a male, and that they determined that it was male. And they, of course, this time, though, they got the opportunity to look at his teeth. That in 2009, the American scientists didn't get that opportunity. So I'm not faulting anybody. You have to take it the way it's given to you. And I'm sure he did the best. His team did the best that they could. So that's been published and peer-reviewed. I don't think it was necessary because we had the information from Dr. Sugnes, the Norwegian American from Harvard and UCLA, what he concluded. But now you have another scientist, a French scientist, and I'm sure they did a very good job. It's a slam dunk. He's dead. And that's sad. But it's interesting.
Yeah, for sure. It's crazy to think about how much of history we might have completely wrong. Just as you're talking through this and just you're hearing about like that it's taken almost 100 years to kind of get to the final story, and there's all these different theories. And I mean, history is typically written by the winner anyway. And you've got scientists working on this in different groups and looking at the evidence, and finally, and you've got a TV show that's come out and saying that it's, open, and that's what the public's hearing. And there's all this misinformation and disinformation, and you feel like you finally found the truth, and there's, your one voice talking about this. And it's like, what are people really going to remember about Adolf Hitler? And that was relatively recently in terms of time and science and history, and, in terms of our ability to look at these things scientifically. But that's why for me, exploring ancient history and human history is so important and so interesting, because it feels like we really feel like we know all of the answers, and everything's right. Our entire story of history is right. But when you get into the details of a case like this that didn't really happen that long ago, and you see how much is just, misinformation or disinformation or wrong information or whatever, I think it's a good reminder of constantly staying curious and staying open-minded.
Yeah, and I know how the people feel. I'm empathetic. I mean, you take the Shroud of Turin, for example. I'm fascinated with that. What is the truth? You've got one group of scientists say that it was only 1,000 years ago, or it was medieval times it was made, and now there's this new evidence that is saying that they took that from a charred corner that had been repaired, and that if you actually look at and using different types of tests on the shroud, that it is 2,000 years old.
So who knows?
Who knows? I mean, I want it to be 2,000 years old. And some of these people want Hitler to have escaped,
right?
And they want the story to continue. So I understand completely.
So what is that like then? Like, the truth about what the actual history of this was, and to have the people that have the control and the power and the voice to get that truth out to the rest of America, the rest of the world, are sitting there replacing you with somebody else that is going to continue and perpetuate this story and never close the end of it because they're getting ratings for their TV show. Like, what is that like from your standpoint to know all of that?
Well, yeah, and to be fair, they didn't replace me. Okay. I mean, technically speaking, they offered me to come on season 3, and they were very good to me, but I declined because I didn't want to continue and I wouldn't call it a hoax. I don't think anybody did. The premise to begin with is nobody knew, except we had these declassified documents, and you had this muck up with the Soviets. And you know what? This is going to be interesting. Let's see where it goes. So I think everybody started with the same premise, and but as it went on, I dug deeper. And I decided that I wasn't going to go forward. They brought somebody else on. Who made the decision that they would never air the final component on that? I have no idea. And, whether it was with the network or who it was, I really don't know. I don't want to know because I don't want to say something that someone might come back and say, hey, that's a false accusation. And I wouldn't want to do. I don't know. I just know that they didn't film it, and it went to season 3. And the way season 3 ended was that the hunt continues. That we'll never really know, or we don't know, but we do. And so it's just like the reporter that contacted me from the newspaper, whichever newspaper it was. I don't know off the top of my head. So that's probably a good idea. I'm glad, so that I don't have to say which one it was. But after giving them all the information, he nevertheless published the article that would get all the readers. And so at my age and at this point in my life, and after all the things that I've been through, Matt, I just put a smile on my face and it rolls off my back. It doesn't bother me a bit. As I was younger, oh my gosh, I don't know what I would have been doing or saying to their face or what. But I'm not looking for a fight, and I just let it roll off my back, and I feel really comfortable with that.
That's cool. That's a great attitude, and good for you to take that path and make that choice. Yeah, and thank you for coming on the show and just kind of educating people about this one, because there's a lot of legitimate conspiracies out there and a lot of legitimate mysteries out there, and things that we just don't know the answer to. And I've investigated a lot of them on this show, and ancient human history is one, and there's plenty of others, and but this one is one where we do have the
it is. It's one. Answer. In this whole notion of, well, that's a conspiracy theory. Well, what do you mean? I don't even like the term conspiracy theory, because conspiracies are real. The mob engages in conspiracies. The government engages in conspiracies. Drug dealers engage in conspiracies. That doesn't make them any less real because the word conspiracy is attached to them. And what do they mean? I think the term is just lobbed out there too easily to say that. There are things we just don't know, and but this, who knows? There could have been a conspiracy to begin with. Stalin could have conspired with the intelligence agents for the disinformation. That would be a conspiracy, sure. Yeah.
Sure.
And 2 or more people, coming up with something, agreeing to do something, there's your conspiracy.
Yep.
And but in this case, no.
Yeah.
Gotcha. No, but there are a lot. I mean, just like a JFK. Yeah, there's no, in my view, and I've talked to mobsters, I've done a lot of research on it. There's no way. And I've looked at forensic evidence. Now I'm going to be labeled, but there's no way that Lee Harvey Oswald was the only person involved. I'm not saying he wasn't the lone gunman. I mean, all you have to do is look at the acoustical evidence. You're going to look at testimony. You know, there's more to it than meets the eye. Congress has now reopened investigation, a congressional committee. I don't know if you're familiar with that at all. That's interesting. I watched a little bit of that. I hope it doesn't mean that the CIA killed him. It doesn't mean that organized crime killed him. But Lee Harvey Oswald, we know that there was a cover-up, and the CIA at least covered up some of its own missteps. And, you know, when you have people covering up their missteps, it gives life to these conspiracy theories.
So we don't know that the CIA did it, but, I mean, what odds do you give the CIA being involved?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know about odds, but I would say that if you look at, I took a look at Oliver Stone's screenplay for JFK, the movie. Yeah. But the screenplay, it was all footnoted. And it was footnoted with archival materials. Many of the footnotes were materials that were in the National Archives. Statements, you know, if you look at the woman that was abducted, my memory's not, you know, all that. I don't recall it exactly, in Florida, and then she said something was going to happen, and you know, these statements are there. Now, whether she's telling the truth, I can't tell you, but to cast him as somebody that's, you know, making the story up and that this is all Hollywood, I don't think it's accurate, and I don't think it's fair. I think that many of the things that are, I can't say give it a percentage, but many of the things that were in that movie were accurate, or at least according to the archive material or statements, things that were in the Warren Commission, the House Select Committee for assassinations of JFK and Martin Luther King, who, by the way, one of my doctoral dissertation supervisors was G. Robert Blakey, who was chief counsel for the House Select Committee. So, you know, I have interest in these things, and I've met some really interesting folks. And so where there's smoke, there's fire. I have no idea what the answer is. I am working on putting a book together on JFK, probably be a couple years before it comes out. But there's a lot of good information out there. But did Lee Harvey Oswald, was he a patsy? He probably was a patsy. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, how does somebody sign up for something like that? Are you, you know, you could see a situation where somebody is asked to murder somebody, like a high ranking person like that, but I guess they have to agree to confess to it, right? And then ultimately they must be offered something on the back end, I guess, to like, are they like swapping out some prisoner? Are they, you know, sending this guy to his own private island somewhere to live the rest of his life happily? You know, like, I mean,
but there's an easy solution.
What is it?
You just kill him.
Yeah.
And that's what Jack Ruby did.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's an easier solution. That's true. That's true. Yeah, they've killed a lot of people over time. I mean, the CIA, a lot of civilians, and a lot of innocent people have died that have had experiences, and you know, or been framed for something else. So there is truth to that. Sadly, that's a part of our human.
And Jack Ruby was mobbed up. He was connected to Carlos Marcellus and Marcellus crime family there in New Orleans. He worked for him. You know, there's a lot of inferences to draw.
Yeah.
Why is Jack Ruby coming in and shooting Lee Harvey Oswald?
Right.
What was the statement? As a child, I remember this, and I was only like 5 years old, but I do remember because I was in the hospital watching this on TV. I had an issue with my foot, so I was in there. But as I was growing up, the statement was always, well, he loved JFK. And that he made the statement, you killed the president, so I'm killing you, and this is why he was doing it. But no, he's mobbed up. You know, that no one mentions that. I mean, some people did, but you know, generally, he was cast as someone who loved the president, and that's why he killed Lee Harvey Oswald.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Interesting. Well, good. Yeah. Let's, that's a deep rabbit hole,
It is.
obviously. Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there any other conspiracies before we get on to kind of next? Are there any others that you're passionate about that as an investigator, you feel like you're, that history has gotten it wrong?
No, I don't think so, really, at the moment. I think JFK is very interesting to everybody, just like Hitler is interesting to people. And these things grab our attention. All the stuff with the unexplained aerial phenomenon, whatever they call that, that's interesting to people. Yeah. And what makes things worse is the allegations that the government is covering some of this up. I don't know. And but these are things that when you have members of Congress that are requesting that things be disclosed,
right,
there's got to be something to it.
There's something going on. Yeah, for
and
sure.
What it is, I'm not sure.
Yep. Yeah, people are seeing something, and something is going on for sure. Undoubtedly, we know that. But well, good. Maybe we segue then into Jack Berkovitz.
Berkovitz. Yeah. And well, after hunting Hitler, I received a call from a relative. I'll just use his first name, Gary. And he reaches out to me, a call or an email. I think it was an email first. And then we spoke. And he said, look, I watched Hunting Hitler, and I'm asking for your help. But let me tell you about my cousin, second cousin, I think maybe the second cousin. And Jack Berkovitz. And he tells me the story, and I'll keep it brief, but he tells me the story of how Jack Berkovitz was a pilot during the Second World War. He was in the Pacific. He undertook many dangerous missions, and amongst his awards, and I've seen the awards, physically seen them, because I've met with the family more than once, and I have photographs. 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses, and they just don't give those out like ice cream, the Air Force. And he was so highly decorated. He gets out of the air, well, I think it was called the Army Air Corps at the time. The Air Force wasn't established until 1947. So he gets out and he goes to University of Southern California to get his degree. Back then, I guess you didn't have to have a degree to be a pilot. Nowadays, you would. So he goes and he gets a degree in engineering, and he decides to go back in the Air Force. So the Korean War has begun, the space race has begun, and we are in the heart of the Cold War. All right, that's interesting. And he said, well, he joins he goes to Wright-Patterson. He goes to another base first, but eventually he goes to Wright-Patterson, and he undertakes a lot of classified missions, flying as a test pilot. He does a number of things at the base. And of course, this is also the base with the Foreign Technology Division. He wasn't assigned to foreign technology, but that's where you do a lot of reverse engineering. I spoke to a general who I'll come to who was involved in the reverse engineering. And he actually flew a MiG onto Wright-Pat, and they were looking at that. So reverse engineering, it's not like it's only this so-called conspiracy theory of extraterrestrial technology, but foreign technology. That's what it was called, Foreign Technology Division. So he's examining Soviet technology. He flew that on. And so I spoke to him. But we'll get to the 2 generals. Another one who was an astronaut, 4-star general. And but Jack is there, and he's doing all of this, and he also is now, according to his wife, Beall, he's testing spacesuits or the prototypes. And he goes into these compression chambers. Now, I spoke to Wright-Pat, and I got a lot of cooperation from the historian over there. I didn't get a lot of cooperation from other people, but there was a historian there that was quite helpful. But I had a general grease the skids for me to be able to talk to that historian, the first general that I spoke with. But the historian was very helpful and said that, he seemed very empathetic towards the family because Jack ends up dying, and I'm going to explain that right now. So he goes and he does the testing of these spacesuits. Now, he's testing them in a chamber. This chamber was designed, well, let me back up just a second. Operation Paperclip was going on at the same time. Operation Paperclip is a project where the United States, immediately following the Second World War, went after Nazi scientists and recruited them to come to the United States. The best, or the most well-known, is Wernher von Braun. And he wasn't one of the ones that I'm engaged with or investigating about, but he is the most well-known person. But there are others, Hubertus Strugard. There are people who designed the chamber. Some of these people were involved in horrific experiments during the Second World War in Germany. Some of these people were involved in experiments like Josef Mengele, who was, the angel of death. He was really doing some, but some of them were taking alive prisoners, whether they were disabled individuals, they were Jewish, whatever they were, because, Hitler was against all of the homosexual, disabled, people with different disabilities, and they had them there. He wanted this pure race. And so they would take some of these people and put them in freezing water to see how long they could stay in there without dying, but then they would die. Some of them did die. Well, this is quite interesting because they were doing this for the Luftwaffe, the Air Force, the Nazi Air Force. So if their pilots crashed, how long would they survive in this ice cold water? Well, so some of these scientists are here in the United States under Operation Paperclip. Wright-Patterson brought in a lot of scientists. They would say these were the ones that weren't Nazis. They had to sell it that way to the American people. Their records were sanitized. This is a proven fact now. I'm not uncovering this. Mm-hmm. It's proven that they sanitized these, that officials at Wright-Pat, officials in the Air Force, officials in the CIA provided misinformation to the American public about these folks. They could never sell, well, we're bringing in these Nazis. They just said, look, we're bringing in these German scientists. It's better that we have the German scientists working for us than the Soviets to have these German scientists. And that's their moral way of moral justification for bringing these folks over. So they did. And they lived in I think they call it the wooden village on the hill, apart from right there at Wright-Pat, right outside Wright-Pat. And I've seen the videos, I've seen the photographs, and I've interviewed people.
Wright-Pat's in Ohio.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is in Dayton, Ohio. That's right. And so one of what the widow called a Nazi, well, we'll get to it. He was a member of the Nazi Party. His name was Johannes Schauberg. And Jack had come home and told Beall, his wife, that Schauberg had been taunting him, saying, we didn't get you the first time, Jew boy, but we'll get you the next time. So she says, look, you need to go to your commander. We're not going to have any of this. And I think she had that personality. She can tell her husband what to do. The fact that he was a major didn't make any difference. She was the boss. And she told him, you do it. He did. He goes to the commander, according to Beall, as it's been recorded in an official interview, not official interview, but in an interview with Gary. Gary interviewed her and took all these notes, that the commander said, you would just keep your mouth shut. Don't say anything. This is all about national security, and you're just going to have to put up with it. So I did research on this, and I could see that it wasn't long thereafter that Schauberg was no longer at Wright-Pat. He went to work for Honeywell Honeywell's a great corporation, but Honeywell was doing contracts with the Air Force and with the CIA at the time, unbeknownst to the American public. What does that mean? Anybody can infer from it whatever they want to infer from it. But I guess I am implying something that's, not completely kosher.
So what were they doing? What would Honeywell have been doing?
They did all sorts of technology and to help advance the space race. I mean, I'm sure they did many other things. And what do they do now? I mean, heating systems. I mean, they do all sorts of legitimate things, but they were helping the U.S. government. They were helping the CIA. I've looked at some of the documents, and you could see that there were projects that were in Nevada and other places that they were connected with.
And were they a private company at that point?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So
they can do whatever they want.
I reckon so.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they're working for the government, so why not?
Right.
They're getting paid and they're under contract and they're doing what the government does is what the government does.
So this scientist, this guy who's involved in the manufacture potentially of whatever equipment that just killed people in horrific ways is now brought to the United States. He was working at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. He threatens this guy, Jack Berkovitz. He leaves Wright-Patterson Air Force. He goes to Honeywell, basically, right? Is that where we're at?
And I probably did say it that way. Yeah. There wasn't any direct evidence that he himself was involved in those experiments, but there were two brothers, and there was Hubertus struggled, and then there were the Huber brothers that were involved, and they were all at Wright-Pat as well at different times. But this guy, I can't say that he actually did one of those experiments. I don't want to say that, but I'm going to come to what he did do.
Okay.
But I don't want to say that because I want to be precise as I can.
Yep.
But he was the one that was taunting him and said, "We didn't get you the first time, Jew boy. We'll get you the next time."
Right.
So, it's like one person's doing one part and another person's doing another. And so then the day comes that Jack says, tells his wife, "I have to go in and do another one of these tests." And his wife, Beall, says, "Look, she insisted that he not. But he went ahead anyway. He said, "Look, I just had a medical exam the other day. I passed it with flying colors. I'm going to go. There's no problem." So he does. And he goes into this chamber. And there, as I'm told by a lot of people, that there's a kill switch on the inside and there's a kill switch on the outside in case something goes wrong. And apparently something did go wrong. Now, there was another major there. And we'll just call him Jake. And they were close friends. And as I'm told and reading the notes, something did go wrong. The kill switches, none of them worked. And basically, Jack's body blew up inside that chamber. And they opened it. They finally got it open. And someone said, call for a rabbi. And there was no time. His eye had popped out. They tried to massage as hard as everything was bleeding from all the different orifices. It was horrific, and he died. And the next thing that I looked at, and I can't say that Schauberg was there. Other people were there. I don't know that he was there. There's no evidence. I tried to look for it, but I couldn't find it that he was there. Although I did find indications that, nevertheless, or despite the fact that he was up in Minneapolis working for Honeywell, he was still coming to Wright-Pat on different occasions. For what, whether it was working on this particular project or not, I don't know. Now,
sure, let's invite a bunch of Nazi scientists into our country. What's the worst thing that could happen, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's just incredible. But what's even more incredible is the people who, just government officials, Air Force officials, people that would just suck it up and say this is for the good of the country, even though these types of things were going on and providing this misinformation. And that's just the way that it was, and I suspect that's just the way that it is. But the autopsy was conducted by an Air Force physician. The death certificate, nevertheless, was one from Dayton, Ohio. And I don't know, Ryan, if you've got that death certificate up, it's quite interesting. And if that's only part of it, we can see somewhere on there, it's been a while since I've looked at it, where it says, you can see he died in the compression chamber. What I'm looking for, it says this is classified. Oh, yes, I do see it. So under the medical certification right there in the middle, it says that he died of a...
oh, right. Yep.
Oh, yeah, and it says this is classified information. Well, why is it classified if he was just doing... And here's the thing. They said in the Air Force, when I spoke to them, they said that all he was doing was his annual or his biannual checkup in one of these compressions where you go in and you just do a routine test in this, that he never tested spacesuits, okay? But his wife said he tested spacesuits. Here it says he's in a high altitude chamber, explosive decompression and altitude. She said that he was doing that. When I gave two people, I gave an astronaut, Jimmy. He told me to call him Jimmy, and I didn't even want me calling him General. He said, call me Jimmy. He got angry with me when I called him General. McDivitt, I think. You know, he was an interesting guy, and he just recently passed away. But he said, look, John, based upon what I'm seeing here and the description of what happened there, there's no way that this is any type of routine test. He said, oh, and I told him, but the Air Force told me that he was not testing spacesuits, that his unit did something else. And he said, well, look, he was an Air Force test pilot. And they always were calling for other volunteers to test spacesuits. They needed them. And besides the fact that there's a published article that said that he was among 17 people that were specially selected for an experimental program. That doesn't sound like routine to me. And he said, that's what test pilots do. They volunteer. They want that excitement. That's what they do. That's coming from Jimmy McDivitt, I think is what his name was. And I apologize to the general. Is it McDivitt? It was. There he is. Yeah, Jimmy McDivitt. And he was a little testy with me. He wasn't the easiest one, but I handled him and had a good conversation with him. And I had another general who was the general of that base. He just recently passed away. And he was behind us 100%, and he agreed. And he was the one that did the reverse engineering, or at least flew the MiG in for reverse engineering. He didn't go into everything that happened at the Foreign Technology Division. So, you know, I'm not saying that historian misrepresented what he did when he said, well, he didn't test spacesuits because of this unit. Well, how would he know? He's given me the best evidence that he can, or best information he can, based upon the evidence that he has. But listen to Jimmy McDivitt. He's telling me these test pilots, even if they weren't in that unit, I'm not saying that he wasn't, that they would have been volunteering to do this. So what happens next is Jeannie, Jack's daughter, who I spent a lot of time talking with, she told me that she came home and all the officers' wives were there, and they were comforting her mother, who needed to be sedated because she was hysterical, and that she was in the house, and two big, and this is her words, burly air policemen, I suppose, with the two big burly air policemen with their AP patch on their sleeves came in, and they said, where's his desk? And they took his desk. And I don't know if they said this is classified. Well, you know, you're not allowed to take classified information home. All you got to do is watch TV right now, and you can see what happens when you do that. So why he would have had classified information at home, I mean, that doesn't really sit well with me. But that's what the APs, that's what they were claiming, that it was classified information, and they took his desk from there. Next, They're in the train station. Beall wanted to see the body. They would never let her see the body. Never. She insisted. Ostensibly, they didn't want her to see it because of his condition. I mean, I that's what I infer from that. I don't know why, but they wouldn't let her see it. There could be another reason why. I think there's some kind of discrepancy at the funeral home that's going on there. But then they're at the train station, and Jake, who was Jack's friend, and ends up walking when he was a colonel. He takes Jeannie. He walks her up for her wedding because they stayed in contact after her father's death. But they're at the train station, and he's escorting. So there you have the coffin on the train. You've got Jake. You've got Beall. Gary was there, but he didn't go because he was just a child. And so you got Jake, Beall, Phil, and Roger. These are the children. And they're headed to Los Angeles, which was Jack Berkovitz's home of record. And they've got the paperwork to go into the National Cemetery in Los Angeles. On the train or at the train station, Jake tells Beall, look, you can't talk about this. What happened? This is secret. You could be in danger. You could lose your pension. You need to change your last name. And she did. All the family didn't, but she did. And some others did. But she did. That's the important thing. She changed her last name from Berkovitz to something else. And that's pretty bizarre statement. And so what was that all about? And then they take the train, and then when they go for the interment at the National Cemetery in Los Angeles, they say, we're not taking this. We only take them if they came from a particular veterans hospital. All right. So they went and buried Jack's remains were buried in a Jewish cemetery there in Los Angeles.
Or we think they were.
Yeah, or we think they were. So I called and I had a colleague from LAPD with the Special Investigations section who was working with me on this, Adam Berkovitz. It's funny what the name, and his dad was buried in the same cemetery. And he told me that. But I went to, I called a number of people. I called that hospital and explained that they came there, and they said, no, we were accepting military remains, casketed remains. Of course, why would we not? I said, I don't know. We were told that they stopped years before, and that the only people that they were allowing, and this is according to the records, were veterans that came from a particular hospital, military hospital or veterans hospital. They said, that's absolutely not true. The only reason, this is what they told me, they didn't say that factually this fits the case, and I'm not saying that either. They said the only reason we wouldn't take that casket if there was no body in it. And that's that. So I did speak to the Veterans Administration, and they were completely befuddled. They were very cooperative, gave me lots of records, lots of information about this, and they concurred. So I guess on that particular case, the next thing I wanted to do was to find out a little bit more about Johannes Schauberg. This kind of concludes this, because I'm not, I haven't really quite concluded how I'm going to present this in a book or in something else, an article that I've been working on. But I did go to College Park, an amazing place in the National Archives, very helpful people. And I got his paperclip file. And there he was for the first time. I could look at him straight in the face. And I provided that picture to, and I didn't give that to Ryan, but I'm going to. And I provided the picture to the family. And I think they were just shocked and looking at his face for the first time after all these years. Mm-hmm. It indicates in there that his, contrary to what, he lied to the U.S. government. He said that he was not, in the documents it says this, he said he was not a member of the Nazi Party. But in there it shows that he was a member of the Nazi Party, and they nevertheless allowed him into the United States. Now, my research kind of indicates, and I think you had mentioned to me once before, well, really, where were they? And I think they like this word ardent. Was he an ardent Nazi or just a Nazi? Okay, all right. And so I guess they concluded he wasn't ardent, and they let him in. I have no idea. But I will tell you this. I tracked down his son, who I Googled up, maybe a month or two ago, and unfortunately, or sadly, he's passed away as well. So I interviewed him. I didn't tell him that.
Did he die of like old age or in like some?
I think he died of old age. Yeah, and I didn't tell him who I was. I said I think I presented this, that I was looking at Operation Paperclip at Right Pad, not looking at this particular death. So, I didn't lie to him, even though of course I could have, but I didn't. I said, I'm looking at Operation Paperclip in Right Pad, and could you tell me a little bit about that? And he said, yeah, I was there. I went to school there. And he said, I was treated fine. My dad was there. My mom was there. He said, what happened was, after the fall of Berlin, my father and my mother and me, and I don't know if he had siblings, I don't recall, we went to France. And my father was working for some type of scientist. His father was a scientist. Well, we know that because he was working as a scientist right there at Right Pad. And he said that he worked for some company. He said, but we were being harassed in France. Look, this guy, he was a dentist. And I think he was also a retired or former U.S. naval officer. Matt, he was a pure gentleman. He was a delight to talk with. And I felt kind of bad that I didn't tell him the whole story of why I was discussing this with him. But he said, one time the boys had completely encircled our home, and the police had to be called to disperse them. He said, but I don't blame them. He said, look, we were Germans. Look at what the Nazis did to the French. And here we are in France. And what do we expect? Or we didn't like it. He said, but what do you expect? These boys, they're going to say, hey, you want to go play ball? And it says, so my father went to the U.S. Embassy or a consular office, I'm not sure, and convinced them that he and some others could join in on Operation Paperclip. And he was successful, and we were brought to Wright-Patterson. Now, I've looked at all those documents. I've got copies of all those documents of him coming into, some of them indicating people are prisoners of war, and because they had different classifications at the time. But yep, there he is. There's Schauberg right there coming into Right Pat, and it all fits. Am I saying that Schauberg sabotaged the chamber? Absolutely not. I'm just giving you the facts as I know them. I don't know that I can get anything more from this. I've done Freedom of Information Act requests. The family did and never got anything. They said there was no records. I did one on Right Pad, and they said we don't. That it was a major, and she sent me an email and said, "Can you call me?" And I did, and she said, "Look, we don't have anything on Jack Berkovitz here. But my advice to you is to write to this particular agency, and because I can see in my computer system that they do have records. Now, the family's being told that they don't, and she's telling me that they do. They thought he was completely wiped off, the face of the earth. That I won't go that far at all to say that, and I did get records, the ones from the Veterans Administration. Some of them were very personal, and which I wouldn't discuss, and but it does contain information about his death, obviously, because the widow received veterans benefits on that. But this is just a mystery that probably will always remain completely unresolved, but I present it to you and to your audience, and I will present it in the next forum that may come out, and it's for the readers or the viewers to draw their own inferences here. But there are a lot of things, there are a lot of missteps, and there are a lot of cover-ups here, and that's really it on that.
Wow. Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, it's crazy because the reason that I reached out to you is because I was interested in this Adolf Hitler thing, and and I just kind of asked AI, and who would be the best person to talk to, and your name popped up as one of those people, as to having highly researched this topic, and it's just amazing that I figured we would get into that. Did he really go to South America? Did he really die in the bunker? And that would be what we talked about. But you have so much more information than that. You've had so much, a significantly important career, and you've investigated so many other, incidents like this. I mean, we're talking about JFK 20 minutes ago. You know? I mean, it's so it's really cool. I just wanted to say I very much appreciate you coming on and sharing your knowledge.
No, absolutely.
The insight onto some of these old events and some of these situations that probably not a lot of people have really thought about or heard of.
My pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
For sure. Yeah. Really cool. You spent a little bit of time in Guantanamo Bay.
Well, I did. I was selected by an organization in Europe to be a monitor, and I guess they have people that rotate down there to view the proceedings at Guantanamo Bay. So I spent a short time down there. It's only a week, but I was down there on the case or the pretrial motions on Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the alleged mastermind of 9/11.
And just remind people just really quickly before you get into it, Guantanamo Bay and just why it was set up and how it operates.
Well, Guantanamo Bay is a U.S. naval. There's a U.S. naval base there, and I think we have an indefinite lease on the land, and it has nothing to do with 9/11. It's been there for a long time. I mean, the Guantanamo Bay has obviously been there since. Cuba's been there since the planet was made, but we did have a base there, and we were involved in their independence movement, and we were given this naval base, and we still have it, and I don't know that the Cuban government really likes it, but they don't have a whole lot to say about it, and it's really interesting. I thoroughly enjoyed going there, treated like a king by the U.S. government, and with a lot of respect, and I just like it because it shows a really good side of us. And I'm not saying that all of the sides of our government is good, but they treated us very well. So after 9/11, President Bush established that part of Guantanamo Bay, the U.S. naval base there would be a section of that would be used to house prisoners, Al-Qaeda prisoners, Taliban from the War on Terror, and also to set up a tribunal or a military commission. And we've used military commissions from before the Civil War, during the Civil War, World War II. We've used these in the United States. So they're nothing new. It's not a court-martial because court-martials are designed to prosecute members of the military. This is to prosecute foreign enemy combatants, spies, things like that during time of war. And rather than using our what they call Article 3 courts, which are the courts in the Constitution, like U.S. district courts. Now, some people, including Eric Holder, former Attorney General of the United States under President Obama, he thought we would be best to be in the U.S. district courts. There's a lot of merit to what he was saying. But Congress passed a law that said that they had to stay there and they had to be prosecuted there. I think people felt like they would get a stronger penalty. There's more security, definitely more security. But we've tried Richard Reed. We've tried other people here in U.S. district courts without any problem. And we've had expedient justice, speedy justice, and we're not getting it there. The trials just go on and on and on and on and on. And some people have been held for like 20 years and nothing. And Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who was who was captured. He was captured in Pakistan, and he was the mastermind. Osama bin Laden looked to him to be the architect of what happened on 9/11, and he was, recruiting developing the cells, recruiting the people who were going to be the pilots, how everything would be orchestrated. There he is.
Sure. Yep. I remember that guy.
And so the FBI, they did a fantastic job tracking him down. I'm sure the CIA was in on that as well. Just exceptional work. And they got him. And they took him to a black site, CIA black site, secret. Nobody knows where his black site is. I'm not sure. I think it's released now. It might have been the one. It was either Egypt or Poland, but I don't remember. And he was waterboarded 183 times. So is waterboarding torture? It's too simplistic of a question because, like I mentioned before, putting somebody and pouring water over them, and you could call that waterboarding, that doesn't constitute torture. You need two other things. You need a specific intent, such as to elicit a confession, and you have to be applying a permanent, or not permanent, a long-term pain, physical or psychological.
That's subjective.
It is.
And the difference between torture and not torture is intent. That doesn't make any sense either.
Well, yeah. I'm not saying that it wouldn't be a crime.
Yeah.
It's just that if you look at the definition of torture, legal definition of torture.
Sounds like that needs to change.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing in international law as well. But there is an alternative. So if they were doing that, of course, if you got a prisoner, but if they were doing that and you didn't have that intent, you still have cruel and inhuman treatment of an individual. It's just maybe not good. The charge wouldn't be torture. But we have the same absurdities in other laws as well that need to be changed. So, but in this instance, of course, it's torture because and 183 times.
Right. And they're just waterboarding. Just remind everybody, you're pouring water over somebody's face, and eventually they have to attempt to breathe, and so they inhale the water. Is that basically what's going on?
Well, not close.
Okay.
They are not inhaling the water. They feel like they're drowning. It's going into the nasal cavity. I don't know all of the nomenclature of what's going on here, and perhaps I should, but I don't. But what I do know, and there's a good image and they have like a cloth over the face, and they pour it like that. That's a great image there. But it makes them see the sensation of drowning.
Right.
It gives them the sensation of drowning. I don't know how they know it's a sensation of drowning if you've never drowned, but I guess they do. And so if they're having that, it's scaring the you-know-what out of them. Mm-hmm. And the idea is that this is inducing them to confess. What it does do, and most of the information, and if you look at some people like former CIA Director Brennan, he says that there's not one instance where this led to a confession. I don't know who's telling the truth, okay? But whether he is or other people are, I just don't know. Whether he's informed or misinformed. But you would think that the former director of the CIA would know what he's talking about.
Yeah, I wouldn't assume that.
Okay. All right. So, do you get any physical damage? Well, some people have died from this. They have heart attacks and they do have physical damage. Lots of people have had PTSD. They've had psychological damage, and psychologists have gone to court and testified to that. I know it wouldn't take me 183 times to have that, but if I'm a brave Air Force pilot or Special Forces officer and I'm going through training and I know that they're going to do this, but they're not really going to hurt me. I've never been through it, but I probably could make it through. Other people do. I wouldn't call it torture. It's not torture because they're not doing it for the intent of hurting me, and they're not doing it for the intent of getting information out of me. And I'm going to trust them, I hope. And so it's not torture that way. But what these folks go through does constitute torture. And even though there are a lot of people in the government, and you had the legal counsel, OLC, the Office of Legal Counsel in Washington, wrote an opinion that this and other techniques doesn't constitute torture. But those have been rebuked, rebuffed. People say that it's nonsense to have said something like that. But that's all they needed to go in there and do this. But psychologists have lost their licenses for what they've done down there. So Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, he's eventually taken to Guantanamo from the black site. And at some point, he's no longer in CIA custody. I'm not saying that CIA wasn't involved with anybody at Guantanamo or him at some point, but at some point, it's over. And he does confess. Now, did he give truthful information or untruthful information? I don't know. But he does give confessions about the USS Cole, the first World Trade Center bombing and other things, and, of course, 9/11. So then you have FBI agents and others, so they call them clean teams, where now they would go in there and re-interview these individuals such as him and try to get statements from them, not using these techniques. But are they really clean teams, or are they forever tainted? These are things that are litigated before the military judge at Guantanamo Bay. I don't even know what if there's ever been a firm definitive ruling on it. I know that I would say that it's probably forever tainted. But, someone could have an entirely different view. Obviously, the U.S. government did. They wanted those statements to be admissible in court. So I went down there for these pretrial motions. And I saw him. At one point, he got up, I think it was during a break, and the court hadn't really reconvened yet. And I was standing in the gallery right next to the plexiglass window, probably bulletproof, and looking into the courtroom. He turns around and he makes eye contact with me, and he didn't take his eyes off of me. It's kind of an unnerving feeling, but I didn't back away either. And I'm down here to observe, so let me observe. And here I am telling you, so what's the story to tell? Mm-hmm. And
how far away was he from you?
I wouldn't, for me, and what do you call this gentleman over here?
Roz, R-O-Z-Z.
That's about from me to Roz.
Okay.
Yeah. And
15 feet, 12 feet.
Yeah. And so an MP walked over and said, "Tuck your badge away." And what I learned, I don't think he told me that, but what I learned is that sometimes they could see your name. And if they could see your name, someone could Google you up, and it makes a lot of sense. And perhaps I should have been more security conscious than I was. But we were told to keep our badges out at all times. So, but I guess I could have used my own discretion or walked away and not sit there and make that contact. That's probably I shouldn't have done that.
So speaking of making contact, was it more intimidating to look at this guy's eyes or Roz's eyes?
His eyes.
Yeah.
And, the whole thing is...
You stared into those things?
No, I haven't.
They're terrifying.
Are they?
Terrifying.
Okay, I'm going to check it out.
Yeah,
all right.
Yeah. Go ahead.
But, I don't need, somebody running my name and parking out in front of my house. And so what was I there for was to be a neutral observer, and I had to do a daily report. It's online somewhere. I think that I was very fair. I wasn't pro-defense. I wasn't pro-prosecution. I wanted to see what was going on. Now, these were defense motions, and I would watch those defense lawyers, one of which, the lead defense attorney, was also the lead defense attorney for Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. And what he succeeded in doing in that trial was freeing or avoiding the rope, as they would say in England back in the day, but the electric chair or whatever, the death penalty. And perhaps that's what he's doing here, is just making sure he's not executed. They all, a lot of these people want to be martyrs, but now you're in court and you don't want to be a martyr. You don't want the death penalty. If you really did it, I don't voice an opinion one way or another on the death penalty. I have my own personal view on that, but they're brave. They're brave, and say they want to be martyrs, and how holy that is. And then now you don't want the death penalty?
Well, they want to be holy as if they're fighting in the war. They want to be a martyr if they're out there fighting and they die and they're okay with that. But if it comes to dying afterwards from the enemy, putting you to death, that's not okay. That's more like that would be looked at. They're going to be more powerful alive to their people back in their own country as inspiration of keeping that fight alive. And hey, I got to go save this person, as opposed to dying and just being forgotten
that makes
about.
sense. Yeah. Thanks for that. Really, it does make sense.
Yeah.
So I watched the defense attorneys. They did a brilliant job. But it's like any court case. You hear one side, you say, man, that's a slam dunk. Then the prosecutors came up. They did a brilliant job, really. I remember walking up to one Army prosecutor, and I just had to tell him, you just did an amazing job. I'm not for KSM at all. Maybe they think so because I'm there as this so-called neutral observer, that I'm for the defendant. Absolutely not. But I wasn't for, hey, hang this guy either. I mean, in theory, the way it should be, he should be subjected to a trial and let the judge determine whether he's guilty or innocent. I mean, and so I tried to be fair. I mean, I might have my own personal opinions, but I put those to the side there a bit and watch the trial. And so they both sides did a brilliant job, and so the interesting thing that happens, and I don't know all the details, of course, but after I left Guantanamo, I caught on the news that the convening authority for Guantanamo Bay was a retired general, and she was appointed as the convening authority, so she was over all of that. But she's in Washington, or the Pentagon. And that she had approved a plea agreement between KSM and the defense, and the prosecution, that he and others, there were some, there's others there, they're saying that, or there's an agreement that they escape the death penalty. They don't want it. They don't get the death penalty. I guess they get life imprisonment without parole of any kind, but they have to get up and answer questions for victims' families. And so while I was there, there were family members that were there. I guess they get to rotate. They're selected and they rotate to come in, and they're treated special, as they should be. And they have a little curtain there, so we're not looking at them, and they're just the family there, and they're watching through the glass as well. And that, so the victims' families, not just them but others, could ask questions and find out really what went on. So then there was family members. I don't know if they were in New York or just wherever they were. They were outraged about this plea agreement and said that they weren't consulted. I don't know whether they were or they weren't, but some of them were saying, "Look, we're not consulted. This isn't right."
So who was the Secretary of Defense at that time?
Yeah, that was Lloyd Austin.
Okay.
A great military officer. And here's what's kind of bizarre, I think. He says that he was never consulted on this. Now, I can't imagine that. If I was the convening authority, I'm not saying that he's not telling the truth. Mm-hmm. Something just doesn't sit right. If I was the convening authority and I signed off on that agreement, I certainly wouldn't be signing off that agreement without speaking either to the president or to my immediate supervisor, who was the Secretary of Defense. Are you kidding that I would do that on a death penalty case against the mastermind of 9/11? There's no way that I would sign off on that. But he says that he wasn't consulted. The president, Joe Biden, says he wasn't consulted. So when the uproar starts with family members, they backtracked. And they said, Lloyd Austin, he said, I am revoking the plea agreement. And I'm revoking to the convening authority, and I don't remember her last name, I am revoking your authority to enter into any plea agreement for any of these defendants, which they don't call them the defendants, they call them the accused, just like in a court martial. For these accused, you can't do that. This is it. I will be the person that does that. And I looked up the Military Commission Act. I teach a course on the Military Commission Act, and he's got that right. But if he delegates to her, he can do that as well. But he was revoking that delegation. Why? Well, he says he was never consulted, and then you see all these people that were outraged. So it goes down. So then the prosecution, they object and say, well, we've already entered into this plea agreement. And I think the defense is saying the same thing. I believe. I stand to be corrected. But that they're telling the military judge, we entered into this, and some of it has already begun to take place. And once some of it, whether it's the accused giving some of the information that they said, that I don't know what it is, but once you've taken a step forward, advanced toward that agreement, that it can't be revoked because someone has already started fulfilling the provisions of the agreement. And the military judge agreed. And there's more to the story, like Paul Harvey would say. I just don't remember, but it's gone through a few different iterations through appeals, and I'm not sure exactly today's. We're sitting in here in Sarasota, beautiful Sarasota. I don't know what the position is, but I think that the position is that the plea agreement is void. I believe, but could be wrong. And I think that's really, really interesting to me. It's really interesting to my law students. It's really interesting to my undergraduate students who are learning about military commissions, how you can really see the American criminal justice system working on this. So who's telling the truth? I remain befuddled that Lloyd Austin didn't know that was happening. I'm not saying he's misrepresenting anything, but if he didn't, why is that general still have her job? Right. If I was the Secretary of Defense, sorry. Right. You didn't tell me about something like that, I would take a different view.
Well, you know who would be able to sort this all out very quickly and tell who was lying and tell what the truth is very quickly?
Yeah.
Is the police AI robotic superhuman intelligent.
Do some biometric measurements.
Easily.
Yeah,
easily,
there you go.
They can easily gather all the information.
While they're doing that, I guess they could find out who leaked the Roe versus Wade decision.
100%, all of it. They could go back into history and probably solve a lot of things. Yeah. But do we want that? Do we want to give that away? Who knows? Is it worth it to know the truth about some of this stuff?
I wouldn't mind watching that happen. And at least experimenting with it.
If you had to trade it for a robotic police officer being right here in our room with us, making sure we didn't say or do anything wrong, would you be? Okay
No, I
with
wouldn't like that. But I do like the advanced lie detector.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, that's a helpful one. But well, good, man. This has been a great conversation. What did we miss?
I don't think anything. I think we covered everything that we said we were going to do, and I've got more to come. Maybe you'll have me back again sometime.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. What's you want to just maybe remind us what's kind of up next for you?
Yeah, I think I want to finish the Berkovitz project. Then I've got something with JFK. It is historical fiction in some way, but you'll read it as though it's history. But I intertwine some fiction in that. But I'm drawing on artifacts. I'm drawing on archival materials. But I think it'll be I shouldn't say historical fiction. I don't know what's a better way of putting it. But it's historical. But there's a little license for creativity in it. So I guess that's about it.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah,
Very cool.
yeah.
Awesome. Well, we'll look forward to that. Is
Yeah,
there?
yeah. There is one other thing. So
Okay.
if you look me up, I had this company. I still have it. It's a consulting company. It's called the Hague Group LLC, and I drew that name from being in the Hague. We
In the
do a lot of
Netherlands,
you
yeah.
do different things. And then one day I was looking up in the internet. So if anybody out there is interested, take a look at it, and if I can help somebody, I will. But here's the dilemma: is something was on the internet and it popped up and said, well, what is the Hague Group? I said, well, what do you mean, what is the Hague Group? And so a bunch of countries have come together, like South Africa and Chile and some others, I don't know, 9, 10, 15 countries, and now they're calling themselves the Hague Group. And they take the position that Israel is committed a genocide against the Palestinian people. And of course, I'm not getting into that. That's not my company. But I don't know. So if they look up the Hague Group, I am not that. That's what I'm not. So, but other than that, that's about it.
Very cool. Very
Yeah.
cool. Are you on social media at all?
I haven't. And
Okay.
and I'm being told that I need to. And I'm going to take some tips from your colleagues on,
Yeah, for
on how to
sure.
do that.
Yeah, start up an X channel at least. I think that people would be interested in hearing from you on X. It's a good platform to if you're not like putting out content and you just want to have a voice out there
Yeah.
in various communities. X is a good way to kind of to do that. So it kind of lets people hear from you and hear your voice and follow you and hear your thoughts on whatever's happening. And that's I found that's the one that I'm personally most active on, just because
that's
it's
good advice. Thank you for that.
Yeah. I mean, we post our videos, on all the major social media channels, but X is kind of the one where it lets you come out and just, drop a tweet, drop a line, and let people know what you're thinking about. So,
All right. Well,
yeah.
good. I
Yeah.
will.
Yeah.
I'll do that.
Very cool.
Well, thanks a lot, Matt. It's been great meeting you. Thanks for lunch. Thanks for the all the accommodations. You've treated me like royalty, and I appreciate it very
Awesome.
much. Yeah.
Awesome. Very good. Well, again, just super happy you could make the trip and educate us today about these fascinating topics. So thank you for your life's work and all the things that you've accomplished and being able to share a lot of that today. It's been a lot of fun.
Great. Thank you.
Awesome. We'll wrap with that. Thank you, Ryan.